personally like it, but if you do,
Hey guys, sorry, Nick. What's up, everybody? Thanks for stopping by. Hate that we're starting late here, but we're still waiting on Snake was right. Uh, I don't know what happened. I talked to Snake before I went to school, and he said everything was cool. So maybe he fell asleep or something happened. I'm not sure, but anyway, since we don't have him, I'm not sure what I think what we'll do is we'll just like start by letting Nicholas talk about maybe what he has heard from Snake's position, and because there is some material out there about this with Taylor on it. And so, but before we do that, let me just say thanks to everybody that's here. Thanks to any moderators that are in the chat. Let us know how the audio is. It looks like it's doing fine, but just to make sure we're not, I'm not talking and nothing's coming out. And we're gonna wait on Taylor to pop in. So maybe he'll pop in, and um, we can add him, and we'll have this discussion. This is just going to be more of a discussion anyway, so that'll be fine if he wants to pop in here in a few minutes or whenever. So, all right, a couple of announcements that most people who's following my channel will know if you're in my Discord, but some won't if you're just new to the channel. I will be talking to Ask Yourself tomorrow evening. I actually don't have school tomorrow. My math teacher turned out to be pretty awesome. So he's just kind of like, look, I don't even keep up with attendance really. Come in whenever you want. Look, instead of Tuesdays and Thursdays, let's just do Tuesdays. How about that? And I was like, okay, sure. That's awesome. And so he's super laid back, and I was like, awesome. So now I've got Thursdays free, which I got a ton of homework, but it's pretty simple for the most part. So tomorrow night I'll be talking with Ask Yourself, and then Sunday we'll have dry apologist Caleb having a debate with Alex Malpass on the contingency argument. So, but anyway, with that, let me just open it up to Nicholas. He's heard some of the arguments that Taylor has given on the other side, and maybe he'll, just give some of your thoughts and on his material until we hear from him.
Well, thanks for having me. Personally, I think it's a little bit unfair for me to address Taylor's views without him here.
Yeah, well, if you want, just if there's anything you want to say, I mean, like maybe you don't. I wouldn't attack him or anything, but like if you, I'll open it up to you. Just say whatever you want to say, and if he doesn't come in, then maybe we'll just end it and reschedule it or something. I mean, that's
yeah, sure. No, but I do have things that I would like to say. Like, I am guessing that most people that are watching us are familiar with the Euthyphro dilemma, and it comes from a dialogue, Plato dialogue, where Socrates is talking with Euthyphro, and they're talking about basically. He asks, is the pious or holy? Is it beloved by the gods because it is holy, or is the pious holy because it's loved by the gods, or is it the gods because it is holy? Is it loved by the gods because it is holy, or is it holy because it's loved by the gods? And I think that this breaks down into a dilemma. Where are we here? So he is basically asking the question, and I'm posting these in the chat here so anybody can see them written. Do the gods lead what is holy, or are they led by it? And from that, we can see that we have an implicit, if I can find it here, an assumed premise or an implicit premise here, which is either the gods recognize what is holy outside themselves, or they make things holy by loving them. And so we could talk about the different sort of dilemmas or the different problems with those, but where should I go with this? The issue, if they merely recognize what is holy, then holiness isn't grounded in the gods. If things are merely holy because the gods like them or love them, it seems that what is holy is a subjective perception rather than objective quality. But I don't think that this is a true dichotomy. I think that for a long time we've known that this isn't a true dichotomy. In fact, I think that the Athenian Stranger talks about this in Laws, but I wasn't able to get the quote for you. I think that it is that God can be the standard by which we measure holiness or goodness. And that means things are neither holy because they are recognized, nor are they holy because of subjective preference. And so for this reason, I don't think that it's a true dichotomy. I think that there is another option. Yeah, do you have any questions or like anything you would want me to fill out there? Converse.
Let's. If anybody in the chat has a question, just tag me in it. I would ask you this, and if you're just coming in, we're waiting on Snake to come in. But I would ask this, like, so I've heard multiple people talk. They're apologetic on this as something like, well, this was being spoken about polytheistic gods, right? But it's not an argument against a theist, like a monotheistic God. Is that something you've thought about at all?
Yeah, like that is being discussed, but I think that we could extend this, because if you actually examine the Euthyphro, he actually eliminates what they're talking about as pious as what is loved by all the gods. And so it seems that he is reducing the classification to a group where I could imagine, I guess, no, I can't even imagine co-eternal gods. But if some loony thought of co-eternal gods, then what was moral could be rooted in all of them, and they would just agree about it.
Yeah. So you want to tell us a little bit of background about the dilemma? Like it's Plato's work, right? But isn't it Socrates that's talking and asking the Euthyphro?
Yeah, so we all that we have of Socrates is very sparse, far less than Jesus, by the way, and we get it through what are called Plato's dialogues. So everything that we know about Socrates, we hear through who is considered to be a student, Plato. Fun fact, by the way, Socrates taught Plato, Plato taught Aristotle, and Aristotle taught Alexander the Great.
Alexander the Great. I'm listening to an audio book on Audible right now, and it's called The Philosopher's Tool Chest, I believe. And I just heard that maybe like right before I went to school, maybe a few hours ago. That's what he said. He said, I think he said that Alexander the Great was some Peter's son or something like that. I forget exactly, but he hired Aristotle to be his tutor, and he goes, he tutored Peter, or whatever the guy's name was, son, Alex, and you might know him by the name of Alexander the Great. And then that's what funded Alexander the Great is what funded Aristotle's library or research lab or something like that.
There was an academy or something, right?
Yeah, his academy. That's right. So I thought that was really cool. And but anyway, yeah, that's an interesting point. I'm glad you brought that up, because I had just Andrew. No, we haven't heard from Snake yet. We're still waiting to see if he'll pop in. But go ahead, Nicholas. Sorry for interrupting. But I did hear that earlier today, so it's interesting you brought that up. And or one more thing. You know what I was thinking is, you know how awesome like Socrates must have said, like if this is a real deal, like this dialogue was a real deal thing, right? You know how awesome it must have sounded for like the people of that day. I doubt they were going to. I doubt they were. Hold on, wait a second. All right, just got an email from Snake. He said, "Oh, I thought it was tomorrow. I can hop on real quick." So I'm gonna email him back right now and just be like, "Yeah, come on in." But maybe you can start here is I'll just say this last thing is you know what I was thinking about was, you know how awesome Socrates must have sounded to these people at this time, like they're all
It's
sitting
kind of the
around.
opposite. He was,
Really?
yeah, he was killed. He was executed for corrupting the youth. He was
Well, I know.
notoriously considered to be a spreader of nonsense. He was
Well, I
an
know that.
uneducated fool.
Oh, really? Well, okay. Well, I know that he was killed for that, and that he got in a lot of trouble. But I just meant like the philosophers of his day were sitting around. They probably didn't appreciate at all like the severity of the actual claim. But think about it. You're sitting around talking to these people, and you go, "Well, hang on a second. Is it pious because of the gods?" Or that claim just, to me, it just seems like if I was sitting there and I was kind of uneducated and I heard that, I'd just go,
Yeah,
"Whoa."
yeah, yeah. I agree, and I think it is really a profound sort of question and inquiry. But yeah, the people of his day were highly trained, and according to, maybe sophists weren't actually like this, but according to Socrates' view, it seems they were more focused on winning arguments with rhetoric and appearing to be wise than actually attaining wisdom. And I think we probably had similar problems all throughout the ages, but we have a real similar problem right now where we have people that are educated or pseudo-educated, and for that reason, they're very dismissive of people that come from other persuasions. And so I think there's a lot of good ideas that are just dismissed out of hand.
Sure, I'm sure that probably is the case. I just was thinking about that earlier when I was listening to that lecture, and and when I heard him talking about this, I knew the backstory, that Socrates was eventually killed and that they thought that he was corrupting the youth or whatever. And I think that's a similar story with a lot of thinkers. Like I believe there were some accusations made against Da Vinci, right? But I just thought I was thinking about that when I was listening to it, and I was like, wow, that just is such a deep, like, thing to think. And so like the thought process there, and just like hearing it come from him, like if I had never heard that before, I would just think, oh geez, he might have got me on this, like like I might be wrong about all this. And so but I think you're right, there's potentially arguments like that people don't consider. um Dry apologist, he thinks that the contingency argument's one. And that's why we're gonna have that discussion. But is there a specific argument that you were thinking of when you said that?
I'd rather not bring it up right now, because like I can think of a dozen, but because of the exact reason I just told you.
Okay, because nobody.
If I couldn't engage with them, are probably going to dismiss me as some sort of a bigot or ignorant or something like that.
Yeah, and I know that like this isn't something that you necessarily wanted or anything, but like I feel like I should apologize to you, because the other night it almost sounded like I was dismissing you when we were on Spartan stream. And I was trying to prevent like an argument like within like an infighting thing. And I kind of said something like, well, Nicholas used to be a Catholic, and so you guys are going to disagree, or I mean, there's going to be an argument or whatever. And like whatever I said, I can see how it would come off as me saying like, well, Nicholas used to be a Catholic, so he's going to take that view. And that wasn't my intentions, and I just wanted to publicly just like apologize and say like, hey, look, if that offended you at all, I understand that you believe things because of reasons and not because of your background or anything like that. It's the same way as me or anybody else. So I just thought I should say that before we get Nick in here.
Yeah, I appreciate it. Yeah, if I just believe
No
because of my background as a Catholic, then I'd be a Catholic, right?
Sure. Well, that makes sense. So that's my bad, and I can accept a correction. So, all right. So I just resent the link. So we should be getting Taylor in here in just a sec. If there's anything else you want to add before he pops in here as well, go ahead and feel free to jump right in. And what I'll do is I'll put the timestamp for when Taylor comes in. I'll put the timestamp in the description. That way, when people are watching in the future, they'll just be able to jump straight to it. And that's another idea Nicholas gave me that I mean, I already knew, but I slack on the description. All right, looks like we got Snake here, so I'm gonna go ahead and pull him into the stream. Hey, how you doing?
Hey guys. Hey, sorry for the confusion.
Well, yeah, no problem at all. We went ahead and got started. Basically, we just laid out. I just let Nicholas lay out what the Euthyphro was and that kind of thing. So, and he just said a few words about it. So, I guess what I'll do is I'll step back and maybe let y'all just have the discussion. And if I think there's any points that need to be clarified or anything, then I'll just step in and say something.
All right. Yeah. I think it's a pretty succinct way to get to the heart of the morality discussion, and kind of I don't know. It's for me, it's a way to kind of falsify a lot of moral theories, at least ones based on God, because if God is just good because he's God, then there's not really any legitimacy in that. I mean, he may be legitimate, but not for that reason. So
What do you mean by that? There's no legitimacy in that.
There would be no legitimacy in God's morality if it's just based on he's God, so it's good. That would be an argument from basically might makes right.
Okay. Yeah. So I wouldn't say that he's God, so it's good, but I would say that morality, the objective standard of morality, is going to be rooted in the origin of all creation, and that is going to be God's nature.
So, I mean, I don't have a problem with that, unless, if God's nature is just in accordance with reality, I don't have a problem with that. But if God's nature is somehow defining reality, that's where I think it kind of breaks down.
Okay, well, God created like all other reality, all of creation he created.
And then, so I would just say there's a reason he created it in a certain way, and that reason would be basically like to make things would have to make sense. So those reasons would lie outside of God no matter what.
Okay. Now, I think that's a real issue to say those reasons would lie outside of God. So, like, if God is the origin of creation, what reasons would lie outside of him? And again, another question would be, why would they need to lie outside of him?
Well, I think the dilemma puts this pretty well, because the question of, is he good because he's good, or is he good because he's God? And I think we can knock out, is he good because he's God? I think we can show that that's an illegitimate reason. And if he's good because he's good, then that goodness is the same in all possible universes, whether there's a God or whether there isn't a God, and no matter which God you're talking about.
Yeah, Taylor, it seems like you're not actually engaging with the position. You've misrepresented what the Euthyphro is, and the idea that there could be possible worlds without God is a logical contradiction.
How am I misrepresenting it?
So
how is that a logical contradiction?
The question is not, is God good because he's good, or is he good because he's God? The question is, the dilemma is presented as, do the gods love the things that are holy because they recognize that they are holy, which would be outside themselves, or are they holy because they are loved by the gods, which it would seem would be subjective?
Yeah, so how am I misrepresenting that?
Because you're saying that the dilemma, instead of what I just said, is God good because he's good, or is he good because he's God? That would not be the
Yeah, that's the same thing. It's just a different God instead of a pantheon. Does God love that which is holy because he is holy, or because it is holy?
There we go. Okay. No, not because he is holy. No, that's not what the dilemma is. The dilemma is it holy because he loves it, or does he love it because it's holy? Okay, so that's not the same as what you're presenting.
I think it is. I don't see any difference.
Okay, you
So
restate.
we can go with your version if you want. I don't see any difference.
The issue here is, and I noticed this when I was listening to your conversation, is that you seem to be coming from a position that I think you could only hold if you were listening to fundamentalist atheists and fundamentalist evangelists. Like sort of definitions and things that you were trying to force during that conversation are not academic definitions. They're not standard definitions. And you can stipulate definitions, but if you stipulate a different definition that is being used in the argument, then you're not addressing or refuting that argument.
Which definition am I using incorrectly?
One was objective. I noticed another one, sort of irrelevant, was your forced definition of faith. You had this bizarre definition of faith that I really only hear fundamentalists use. And then when you're corrected on it, and by people pointing out, most reasonable people don't use that word that way. You ask the question, well, why use that word? Why not use these other words? And that struck me as someone that had never really engaged a reasonable person on this topic.
Okay.
Okay.
So how am I wrong about that?
That's just not the way that most people use it. And if somebody...
So how is your faith anything other than just believing without reason?
That's just not how people use the word. It's a sort of straw man that people use to attack people with faith, or people that are not grounding their faith in any sort of evidence.
So
People
show me a reason then, and I'll change my understanding.
Well, I'm just telling you that typically, like it talks about who you've been hanging out with, that you would define it that way.
No, it doesn't.
You mentioned Aaron Ra, and that really does sound like an Aaron Ra sort of definition.
All right, well, he's right about that.
Okay, well, you can go ahead and take Aaron Ra's position and use his stipulative definitions, but then when you're trying to engage academic ideas, you won't be engaging them.
Yeah, I will, because I ask you, what is your reason for faith? And then no one can ever actually give one. So then in practice, it is belief without reason.
Okay, because
even
in
if
that conversation,
it's something different.
In that conversation,
I don't care
many
what
reasons
labels
were
we
given.
use.
In that conversation, many reasons were given. You didn't seem
None
to hear
that
them.
I accept.
Okay, why does somebody need to have you accept their reasons?
Well,
for their faith to be based on a reason.
If I don't think you're being reasonable, then I don't think you're being reasonable.
Okay, but their claim is not that they just believe it because they believe it and without evidence. Their claim is that they're believing it for reasons.
And I don't think those are good reasons.
That does not change their definition of faith. That doesn't change their definition of faith or what they're talking about. Now, if you want to attack them and say, if you want to say, I don't like your reasons, that's a different issue.
That's the conversation I want to have.
Okay, then I would suggest you don't proceed from Aaron Ra definitions.
I don't.
Okay.
I proceed from your actions. You're demonstrating how you use faith.
Okay, well, I don't know how many times I can tell you that when people say faith is not just always without reasons, that quite often it talks about lending trust in something for reasons, and they give you the reasons for it, that you would instead say, oh, well, actually, when they say faith, they mean something that is beyond reason.
Right, because when we investigate and we see that you're actually believing for no good reason, for reasons that can be applied to other religions, but you'll you'll use faith in this aspect of your life, but in none of the other aspects of your life.
Yeah, but nobody's claiming that, though. You're like, maybe you met some fundamentalist evangelicals that were saying that, but other than that, like, I don't think you're going to get Converse Contender ever saying that. So if that's your argument against Converse Contender, it's not addressing him.
Well, the labels don't matter, so I'd rather talk about the concepts. So there are Christians who disagree on this, so
right, but you're not
about you personally,
right? But when you're trying to force these very small, like these small community definitions on a larger discussion, then you're not going to be engaging people like Converse.
So
I'm just trying to understand.
Maybe I can add like a clarifying thing here. Maybe this will help like shift the conversation, because so Tom Jump and I had a debate on Modern Day Debate about the definition of atheism, and he gave a stipulative definition of atheism, so I said that, I read from the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy,
Mhm.
the definition that was given by what's the philosopher's name? An atheist philosopher. I forget. Somebody can correct me, or I'll put it in the side chat. But anyway, he gave a stipulative definition that said, "I'm an atheist, and by that I mean I don't think there's any evidence for God, for example." And I said, "Well, what about fideists? They claim that there is no evidence for God, but they don't have to justify their faith in a God. Technically, by that definition, they're atheists." And he said, "Well, yeah." And as one of my friends have said, like, well, if Christians are atheists, I'm not an atheist. And but my point with all that is to say that what he said to me was, and I've seen his point, and we move forward, was, well, it doesn't matter if you're not using my definition, then you're attacking my position straw man. So take my position as I define it, and let's move forward from there. Now we can disagree in the beginning, right? But if we move forward by any other definition, he's right, because then I had to show inconsistency in his argument from that point forward. So maybe you guys can take that, like, and maybe move the conversation with that in mind.
Yeah,
Yeah.
like,
Go ahead.
I was just going to say we can argue over what atheism means, and I suspect I would disagree with you, at least with the Stanford encyclopedia, although not technically, because it does say agnosticism is not even in the two categories of X is true, X is not true definitions.
That's academically standard. That's right.
But agnosticism is not even in that, so it's not referring to belief. It only refers to the claims. So, and agnosticism is not part of that, and the article says that.
Okay,
so wait, let me finish my point. So we can argue over that, but then I would go, well, that's not what I mean by atheism. I prefer you attack this concept. So I don't care what label we use. You use faith or trust, whatever you want to use. I'm going to just attack the concept.
Right, but if you're using definitions that come off memes, like the agnostic Christian, Gnostic Christian stuff, then you're not going to be able to engage in these academic ideas. And I'll tell you, the Stanford definition is the one that's used. It's normative. And so if you're reading something and you read somebody says Gnostic, and you're reading that as, oh, they're this particular kind of an atheist, then you're misreading what they're actually talking about in the text.
That's why you can't engage it. That's why you define your terms in a text.
Yeah, well, these terms are defined in academia, and so when you were forcing other definitions, like when you had this strange definition of
again, I don't care about the labels, just present the concept.
What I'm trying to point out is that because you don't understand the terms being used, because you're coming from this internet atheist background, you aren't understanding what you're reading.
I come from a Catholic background.
Oh, okay. Well, based on the things that you're claiming, you have not been engaged with educated Catholics.
Okay.
Okay.
So present your concept.
Well, can we kind of move it back toward the Euthyphro? Like, I know you guys are doing, like, you're getting to where you're going with this, but, like, can we use that and try to move back toward the Euthyphro a little bit as well?
Well, we can, but my main point is if you read the word objective and you think that it means the elimination of subjective perspectives, then you're not going to understand what you're reading and you're not going to be able to address the Euthyphro. You're not going to be able to talk about objective because you don't understand what the term means.
When did I use that definition?
In that conversation that you guys had.
I probably mentioned that, but that's not the definition.
That's the definition you gave. You asked for a definition.
No,
okay, so what's the definition
not.
you would like to give today?
What about you?
It's not determined by opinions, feelings, or perspectives.
Okay, yeah, that's about what I was going to say, and I agree with that.
Okay. So then why is the Euthyphro dilemma a dilemma? Why can't God's objective morality, or the standard of objective morality, be rooted in God's nature? which is not going to be dependent on his opinions, feelings, or perspectives.
Because then you have to ask, why is God's nature good? How do we confirm that?
How do we confirm that would be an epistemological question, and it would not be an objection to this not being a true dichotomy.
Yeah, it would. Because if we can prove that, then it's just proving that God is only good because he's God.
If I say there are only red triangles and blue triangles, and you say, well, what about a yellow triangle? I can't say, oh, you can't prove that a yellow triangle exists. It's a logical concept. It's a third option.
What's the third option here?
The third option is that it's rooted in God's nature. I've explained it twice.
That's just kicking the can down the road. Why is God's nature good?
Because he's, well, okay, so if there
God's
is morality,
nature is the same as when I say God. I'm talking about God's nature.
Okay, so you seem to think that all the aspects of God's nature are the same thing as good. But goodness and holiness don't just mean God. God has many traits. They're not defined omnipotence is not morally praiseworthy. That doesn't make sense.
Yep, correct.
So we're obviously talking about specific qualities of God when we're talking about goodness.
Yeah. So he has these certain qualities because they're already good. No matter what he says, no matter what any God does or says.
I don't know what you mean by because they're already good, but yes, he has good qualities. That's right. Rooted in his nature.
So say God has X quality. How are you able to evaluate whether it's good or bad?
Do you know what epistemology is?
Yes.
Okay, so that's an epistemological question. That would not be an objection to there being a third option.
I'm just asking,
I just need to show you something. I've explained it 3 times now, I think, that it is rooted in God's nature.
The question is an epistemological one. How do we know if he's good? Is he good because of his power?
Okay.
No, that is the question.
The whether or not this is a dichotomy is saying it has to be this, or if somebody can present another logically coherent option, we don't have to know that it's true, then it shows that's not a true dichotomy.
But your third option is just restating one of the options another way.
It's not restating the options in another way. No.
God is equal to God's nature.
But God's goodness is not necessarily the entirety of God's nature. Like I gave the example of omnipotence not being morally praiseworthy.
But so we can just restate this question: is God's nature good because it's godly, or is it good because it's good?
Neither.
Okay, what's a third option?
God's nature is the standard of morality. That's the third option.
How is that a third option? That's just saying that he's good because he's God.
No, it's not saying that
the standard
he's good because he's God. It would be saying that he is the standard of goodness. That's not he is good because he's God. Well, that's an epistemological question. That's not a logical refutation.
Yes, it is. Is the standard good because it's God's standard, or is the standard good because it's good unto itself?
There would be no existence without God. So God's nature wouldn't exist.
Well, that doesn't matter. You can have an evil God create the universe.
No, well, I think evil God is a logical contradiction, but
so
that might be a side issue. So you're trying to say that it must be something outside of him, or it's just I don't even know what the other option is. But the concept of God we're considering is one that's the origin of all existence. Just like the number 2 is rooted in God's nature and yet objective, so too is the truth or falsity of moral propositions. So 2 is not twice as much as 1 because God thinks it is. Neither does it make sense to say it is because God recognizes the nature of numbers outside himself, since without God, nothing would exist. Nothingness, in the philosophical sense, is total privation of being. You can't say that if nothing existed, 2 would be twice as much as 1, because that would be a fact about something that does not exist.
Well, you're smuggling in the assumption that anything would exist with a God in the first place. But I'm
No,
not
no,
even
no,
talking
no, no,
about
no,
something
no.
that's outside of God, but independent.
This is
It's
the
true,
issue.
independent of God.
This is the issue for you not understanding the definitions of these things. Okay, so God being a necessary being and everything else being contingent on him,
I don't accept that God is a necessary
then you're not
being,
addressing the idea we're talking about.
but I don't accept that God's a necessary
Okay,
being.
then you have not addressed the idea that we're talking about. You're just saying, I don't believe that you're right.
I have to accept that God is a necessary being in order to evaluate the dilemma.
Yeah, actually, in order to understand what we're talking about when we say God, you have to understand that God is a necessary being. That's the concept. It's not the claim that God exists. It is the concept. Well, what is a triangle? Oh, I don't accept your claim that a triangle is a three-sided object. No. It's like, okay, then anything that you talk about when you're talking about triangle is not going to address what the academic community or anybody else is talking about.
But you're smuggling in traits that aren't necessarily true, because this dilemma is true of any god, any pantheon.
Okay,
it originated with different gods.
Right. Well, that's a side question. I think I don't want to get too lost in the weeds about that. But the concept of the big G God, okay, that is like a triangle. It has certain traits to it. We're not smuggling in those traits. That's the idea we're trying to examine. We're looking at the entailments of it, what kind of contradictions there would be, what kind of options there would be.
But
one of the things that we could examine, if you understood what a necessary being is whether or not an objective moral standard could be rooted in that being. But because you don't even understand what we're talking about when we say a big G God, you don't engage in the ideas. And so you think you've got a refutation, but you haven't even read the material really.
No, I have videos of reading this material on my channel.
Right, but if you read something in Chinese and you pronounce it perfectly, but you don't understand what you're reading, then you haven't really read it.
I understand perfectly. But the problem is, in your definition, you could just define him as good. So the question is not about your God specifically. It's about any God.
The question is, if we had a God that was the standard of goodness, could the morality be objective?
That's assuming the conclusion.
It's talking about an if.
Standard, then we've already answered the dilemma.
Oh, okay. There we go. We've already answered it.
Yeah, that's not a third option. If we're assuming that God is the standard of morality, then the answer to the dilemma is God is only good because he is God.
That's not true at all.
If you're assuming that he is the standard, you're assuming that his standard is the good standard.
We're considering if he were the standard.
So maybe I could, I don't mean to interrupt, but maybe I could say this, like, Nicholas, like, I don't know if this is what you're trying to get at, and maybe I'm just clarifying, so I'm like not trying to get in on it. I'm just so like in the statement, like, is what God commands good? Are you saying that God is the good, and so that the whole thing is just kind of a misunderstanding of, like, the whole thing is jumbled to this type of God?
What I'm saying is the standard of goodness is rooted in this God, and this is a classical idea. It's not something we're smuggling in. We're trying to examine what sort of relationship that would be, and if it were rooted in the nature of God, then we would know that not either horn of the dilemma stands, and therefore it's not a true dichotomy. So even if we were to say, I don't believe this God exists, if we can offer a third logical option, we show the Euthyphro is not a dilemma.
But you could define any God as necessarily good.
And that would defeat, if you're rooting the standard of goodness in him, then that defeats the Euthyphro dilemma, because there's another option.
No, because the dilemma is asking, why is he good? Assuming he's good, why?
No, the question is not, why is he good?
How is it not? The question is, does the goodness come from outside God or from within God?
No, actually, that's not the question.
Could it be that what we were talking about earlier about polytheistic gods, which are not typically like the person that created all, the necessary being that created all things, that argument would work against that type of God, but not against a God with the attributes of for example, being necessary and things like that, right? Is that what you're saying? It's just the type of God that you're talking about. If you start with the necessary creator, then it doesn't run.
Yeah, and some people might try to argue that the multiple gods could escape the dilemma as well. I think it would run into a problem further down the line with co-eternal beings, but that would be a separate issue. Basically, we're looking at what are the logical possibilities. Two have been offered, and one of the options is it rooted in God? That's not one of the options that are offered for the dilemma. The two options are...
Yeah, it is.
No.
Yeah.
No. So the two options
that's
are...
what the one. That's what the other option is.
Okay. So I'll read the two options, what the two options are, so that you can be educated. So the two options are: the pious or holy is beloved by the gods because it is holy, or because it is beloved by the gods. Neither of those options is because it's rooted in God's nature.
Yeah, it is.
Okay. So which of those two options is it's rooted in God's nature?
Could you read off your version again? Because I'm just used to, is God good because he's God?
That's the real problem, because I'm quoting from the Euthyphro dialogue.
Okay.
So if you're getting a different argument, then you've never engaged with this argument before.
It's not a different argument. It's just
Okay.
different words, different nouns. Is it holy because gods love it, or do the gods love it because it's holy? Is that right?
That's right. Yep.
Uh-huh.
And neither of those is it holy because it is rooted in God's nature? And if you would like to say differently, then you're going to have to give us an argument why two of those statements are equivalent.
If it's holy because the gods love it, it means that the goodness is rooted in the gods.
No, that is not an equivalent statement, because that there could be many things that are rooted in God's nature that they do not love.
Like?
Omnipotence.
So they don't love omnipotence?
Yeah, that's not considered morally praiseworthy.
They could still love it.
That's what we're trying to talk about. We're talking about
morally ambiguous, but you can still love it.
Okay, but even if he does love it, that still wouldn't defeat that he doesn't need to love it for it to be holy.
So, could your God make 2 + 2 = 5?
No.
That's all I'm saying. He must make 2 + 2 = 4 because that's just the way it is.
No, it's because that's rooted in his nature.
But he can't change that.
That's right.
So his nature is either conforming to the laws of reality that he can't break, or he's using the laws of reality to construct his nature.
No, there would be no laws of reality if he didn't exist. Just like if you don't have a son that's 3 years old, there is no way that he would assemble a set of Lego.
Well, that's why your God idea is kind of incomprehensible.
No, you're missing the argument.
So what is forcing God to make 2 + 2 = 4?
It's not forcing God to do anything. God's nature is what is the grounding for 2 + 2 = 4.
But why is that his nature?
Well, that would be like you're asking, why is God's necessary nature the way that it is?
Yeah. Okay.
That's a good question. And I'm not sure what epistemology we could use to answer that question, but that's not a logical refutation.
Well, that's why I like the dilemma, is because it strikes at the heart of that.
Okay. The dilemma does not ask, how can we know? You are raising the objection, how can we know? That's
the start of it. Is it this reason or that reason? And we can investigate 2 different possible reasons.
It is, but the investigation of the 2 different possible reasons is not how do we know? That's not any part of this logical dichotomy. Now, if you'd like to address the epistemological problem of how we know things about God's nature, or how God's nature is the way that it is, then that's great, but you are not defending the Euthyphro dilemma.
But those are questions that are tied in together with it.
No, they're not.
If it's good because the gods, okay, if it is holy because the gods love it, that means that it's not holy on its own. It's only holy because of the favor of the god or gods.
Right.
That means that they are somehow imbued with this holiness, whatever it is. Now, under
No.
that option, I'm just wondering, what is that? What makes that holiness holy?
It would mean that they lead what's holy. Yeah. So that would not be that it's because they're imbued with holiness. It would be because what they lead what's holy, whatever they beloved is holy. And that's not the position that I'm presenting here.
Well, that's the other option, is they love it because it's holy. And
I'm offering a third logical option. And when I show you, it's
I don't see any third option.
You ask, how can we know that's true?
Is it holy because the gods love it, or is it loved by the gods because it's holy? And or
how can we know?
Well, what is the third option?
The third option is that the standard of morality is rooted in God's nature in exactly the same way that the standard of 2 + 2 = 4 is rooted in God's nature. It's not anything outside of God, because if God didn't exist, nothing would exist, and it wouldn't be true or false that 2 + 2 = 4.
That's just a meaningless phrase, because you can apply it to anything. What about the Greek pantheon? The standard of holiness is rooted in the gods. Is that a third option in this?
Well, I think it could be, as long as these gods are eternal. But I think if you have multiple co-eternal gods, then actually you're going to get down to monotheism again. But that's a conversation that's going to go way over your head, and I don't want to go into those weeds. Let's just deal with whether or not this is an option for a good God. Because this is the thing that you're trying to attack this for, right? Because I don't think you're going around talking to a lot of polytheists.
If it's holy only because the gods love it,
it's not. That's not the case. That's not what I'm defending.
I'm saying if it's holy only because the gods love it, then that standard is rooted in the gods.
Okay, who in this room is defending that position?
Me.
You're defending the position that things are only holy because God loves them.
No, I'm defending the position that if it's holy, because the gods love it, then the standard is rooted in the gods.
Okay, we don't. No, it wouldn't be.
So that's not a third option. It would be. You're just restating the same option.
God loves.
Sorry,
what the gods love, which is not the same thing as their nature.
They would love certain things because of the way their nature is.
Okay. Well, then there you go. Now,
it's just saying the same thing different ways.
Okay. Now, so if the reason why they love it is because of their nature, then now we have a third option here in the dilemma.
How is that a third option? We haven't specified the reason.
It's holy because of their love for it. Their love comes from their nature. It's holy because it's consistent with this standard, which is their nature.
That's what it means. So it's not a new option.
No, you don't understand what you're trying to engage. I will tell you, if you talk to any philosopher, they will not tell you that what they're saying is they love it because of their nature.
So you're saying that they would defend the position that the love of the gods is what makes it good?
Yes, that's what's being presented here. The question is whether the pious or holy is beloved by the gods because it is holy, or it is holy because it's beloved by the gods. You'll notice in both of those, it doesn't talk about the nature of the gods.
What's so special about the love of the gods other than their nature?
The love of the gods is different than their nature. That's their attitude towards certain things outside themselves.
Their love is special because of their godly nature.
Well, if you can
it's the same thing
standard in it, then you've got a third option. This is not one of the options being presented here.
If the love of the gods is what makes it holy, then the standard is rooted in their love, and their love is a result of their character, which is their nature.
Several times today, you've said that it's holy because it's loved by the gods, and I've corrected you again and again and again, and said it is not because it's beloved by the gods, it's because of their nature, which is not one of the two options offered in the dilemma.
Now you're flip-flopping.
I'm not flip-flopping. I'm trying to explain something that you can't engage.
You just said that if it's because of their nature, that's the third option.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. And you're trying to smuggle in that it's beloved by the gods because of their nature. But that's
what it means. What else could it possibly mean? The gods are their nature. They are the character is the gods. My nature, my character is me.
Their love for things is not their nature.
So you're trying to specify that it's just their love and not the gods themselves, even though that is an act of the gods.
It's presented as, oh, it's only holy because it's beloved by the gods. It's not presented that it's only holy because it's rooted in their nature. So
would I love things that are not in accordance with my nature?
You could love lots of things that are not necessarily determined by your nature. That's right. And there could be things to do with your nature that you don't love, like the omnipotence option. Like it could. I don't understand what it means to say that God loves 2 + 2 = 4.
What I love is my nature.
Okay. So I don't know how many circles we can go in this, but basically you don't understand the dilemma that's being offered. When I show you that there's a third option, you move over to either trying to force that into the Euthyphro dilemma, which, okay, let's actually do that. Okay, so it's rooted in God's nature, and that's why they love it. Okay, and you think that's one of the options in the Euthyphro dilemma. So that's not correct, but let's just go down that path. What's the problem with that?
The problem with the goodness being rooted in their nature?
That's right.
The problem is that it's a might makes right argument.
No, it's not. It does not say that because they're powerful, it's good.
So what is it?
Because it's rooted in their nature. You just told me it was the standard of morality.
Yeah, so if it...
because they're powerful. That's a non sequitur.
Either it's because they have some sort of status or power that no other being has, or it's because they got it right, like they reasoned to it.
Why would I accept that? Why couldn't I accept that they are the standard, that they are the authoritative measure?
Why would I accept that without reason?
What you're saying, what I'm saying is this is a different logical possibility. You're only offering me 2 logical possibilities. I'm saying, why would I accept there are only 2 logical possibilities? There's this third one. And then your response to me is, well, why would I believe that third one?
It's just paraphrased. It's the same thing. Saying what I love, what I believe, that is my nature.
So I don't know how much further we can go with this, but I would like to...
But what is the problem with that statement?
I would like to maybe close with a statement by Socrates in the Euthyphro, where it says, the abundance of wisdom makes you lazy, he says to the Euthyphro. And I think that the problem with Taylor is that he has spent so much time studying fundamentalist ideas that he is incapable of actually engaging the Euthyphro dilemma and understanding the problems with it.
So what philosophers think that it's not a dilemma?
There's lots. The first one that comes to mind is William Lane Craig. I'm sure planting a
fundamentalist.
You think William Lane Craig's a fundamentalist?
Yeah.
Okay. So once again, you're using non-standard definitions that most people would not use.
Okay. He's a creationist, fundamentalist, presuppositionalist.
Who, William Lane Craig is a presuppositionalist?
He's not a presuppositionalist, and he's not a young Earth creationist.
I've watched many debates where he used presuppositional apologetics.
No, he has used a presupposition method in 2 of his debates, but he does not use those as his main arguments. He just says that we do have to assume certain things. But I'll just point out one more thing. Like,
that's presuppositionalism.
Wait. I just have to stop you. William Lane Craig's not going to present a presuppositionalist argument. His apologetics on the internet are known. He may say that unless we accept a certain thing, we can't argue against it, and he'll present a case for that. But that's not the same thing.
Not convincing.
Yeah, I mean, I guess we're at a crossroads here. I mean,
I would like him to point out where my reasoning fails, where what I love or what I believe is my nature.
Well, like, okay.
How many times can I say that you could love things that are not your nature, and you could also not love things that are your nature? And I gave examples like omnipotence and mathematical truths.
So if I loved video games, is that not my nature to love video games?
It's consistent with your nature.
So if I hated spinach, is it my nature to love spinach even though I hate it?
Consistent with your thing. But
Or is it in my nature to hate spinach?
let's take you as the standard that that of whether or not spinach is a good thing. Okay, now that could be, we could say, oh, he loves it and therefore it must be a good thing, and that would be one of the horns of the dilemma. But if we said, hey, we can look at his nature, and by that standard we can know spinach is good whether or not he loves it or not, then that's a different position.
That doesn't really get to what I was asking.
Yeah, so like maybe I'll give an example, and maybe this is off base because I'm just trying to stay out of it. But I'm just like, I was thinking of an example, like, for example, I might say like it's in my nature to be attracted to multiple women, right? But it's not something that I necessarily want, right? Because I'm getting married this year, right? Like, wouldn't that be an example of something that's in my nature that isn't necessarily something that I would love or want, right?
Well, I think it would be better to use examples like you have a particular nature, but that is not why it's true that your wife exists. Your nature, it's your belief that your wife exists is consistent with your nature, but it is not because of that belief that your wife exists. And just like it's not because of the love that these things are holy.
So again, what is it about the love that is not natural to these gods?
No one said it's not natural. We're just saying it's not contingent on the love.
I thought you said it was contingent on the love.
No, it's not contingent on the love. I've said several times.
Well, your third option is not.
Right. The two options in the dilemma, one of them is contingent on love.
But the implication of the first option, if it's only holy because the gods love it, is that there's something special and legitimate about this love.
No. Well, yeah, like that, and then we would start asking the question of, well, how special and legitimate is this love? But the thing is that the position, the third option, is not that it is holy because it is loved, and it doesn't matter if it's loved or not. And I give examples of things that are true that aren't loved, like mathematical truths.
Okay, I mean, taking a step back, I don't agree with you, but if we granted that this was a trilemma, all my question is now is, why is God's nature good? That's really why I'm using the Euthyphro dilemma in the first place, because I'm more interested in the epistemology of why. How do we know that this God is good, whether we're talking about its nature or its love or whatever we're saying? I don't really care how many options there are.
We can go down that direction. Yeah. So now you want to actually talk about the epistemological question. So now we've moved on. Maybe you'll tacitly accept that it's not a dichotomy, just for the sake of conversation. You say, okay, this third option, you're claiming that God's goodness is rooted in God's nature. How can we know that? And I would say that we could proceed from our moral intuitions. And one of the greatest ways that we can go from that would be the moral ontology argument. Are you familiar with that one?
I'm trying to remember if I went over that in some of my classes. I don't remember it though.
Okay, I'll just type it in the chat real quick. Just give me a minute.
Yeah, while you're doing that, I'm going to ask it. Caleb has a question he thinks that might clarify. He's asking this to Nicholas. I'm going to post it right here on the screen. He says, "Why does God love that which is holy?" He's just saying that maybe that'll help clarify the question, and then you can get do whatever. So while we're here, if you just came in, I I'm short on time because not tonight, but just like in general because I've started back school, and so I'm going to be probably on here a little bit less. But I did have a conversation with Ask Yourself scheduled for tomorrow, so that'll be cool. And then again, Caleb will be talking to Alex Malpass on Sunday. That'll be pretty cool as well. So feel free to check those out. I will post them on Discord and I'll schedule it on YouTube. Snake, do you want to say something while he's doing that? Like is there? Because I'm trying to understand your argument as well.
I mean, really, I'm just asking a question of why is God good? And I mean, I'm familiar with ontology. I just didn't know whether moral ontology had some specific meaning. He doesn't have to take too much time with that if he doesn't need. But yeah, like really, I just used the Euthyphro dilemma as kind of a jumping off point, because either way, it doesn't matter how many options there are. Either way, you always have to ask, okay, so why is that good? So if it's good because it's good, okay, well, what do we mean by good in that case? If it's good because God likes it, or the gods like it, then what is so special about them that lends legitimacy to the ideas that they love? Or if they have some standard, whether I guess in this option it's going to be the standard that's rooted at the beginning of all reality.
It's going to be that God's nature is the standard, right?
Yeah, but then we still have to ask ourselves, why is that standard good? How can we show that standard is good?
Right, but let me ask you this. If there's not a way that humans can have an epistemology to that, I'm just saying that, like, I don't necessarily believe them, I'm just asking you, then do you say that it's not reason that we shouldn't believe it, or that it's not true? Because what I'm asking is like when there's something that we can't really know in science, it's the God of the gaps. So like here's something that we could potentially not know, but it could be true. Do you think that's a good argument to say that, like, therefore it isn't true or something like that?
Well, I'm not making any pronouncements about what is not true. I'm just asking, how would we know it if it was true?
So we would pursue it through our moral intuitions. So it would begin with the apprehension, which you may not have, that objective morals, values, and duties exist. And we would have to understand that could only be rooted in the source of existence. And therefore, we get the premise one in the moral ontology argument. If God does not exist, objective morals, values, and duties do not exist. But objective morals, values, and duties do exist. You may or may not accept that premise. Then we can that God exists and that he is good.
Yeah, I accepted your first view, but I don't understand how you get to, if God does not exist, then objective moral values don't exist.
Well, what would be a grounding for objective morals if God does not exist?
Well, I kind of liked what you said. You said something about it being rooted in existence.
In God's nature, yeah. So if
well, I think any existence lends the same moral values.
Okay, so you think that there are objective morals, values, and duties that just exist in a physical reality, or what? Like what is this thing that contains this moral dimension?
So, a system of morality is just a system that you use to recommend or categorize correct and incorrect behavior. So we can use objective criteria for that are objectively logically sound and are observable in reality, or we can use subjective criteria, in which case why even bother?
Okay. Give me an example of objective criteria of an objective moral rooted in the physical nature.
Freedom.
Okay. How is that? Like, I don't have any moral intuition from physical nature that is a moral ought.
So it is an ought because there is something does exist. So there's something about reality that prefers the freedom of existence to non-existence.
It sounds like you're talking about God. What is this thing that prefers freedom?
Logic,
Logic doesn't prefer.
or just, I mean, logic doesn't exist in reality, but the way things behave is are restricted.
How could we look at the way things behave and derive from that the way things should be?
So there must be some problem of existence for nothingness, since nothingness doesn't currently exist. Otherwise, it would be the only thing that ever existed.
So you think there's a contradiction in the concept of nothingness, and that's why something exists? Is that what you're trying to say?
Yeah, not just the concept, but the reality.
Okay. I think there's major holes in that, but if we were to just go with that, then something exists because it's impossible for nothing to exist. How do we get morals from that?
Basically, that is a degree of freedom. And so you get your ought from an is from there.
No, I don't see any freedom there. You just told me there's a physical world. How is that freedom?
Well, that there's more states of being in existence than there is in non-existence. Objectively, higher quantity of qualities.
And why is that better?
Well, that's the only thing it can be. So it is by nature the better option.
What reason do I have to feel like I would be morally blameworthy if I took away your freedom?
That's how morality works. If you break the rules, then you're being immoral.
Why is that a rule? I don't accept that rule.
Well, that's what a definition of a moral system is. Now the question is, why should I follow this moral system?
No, I'm just asking about your grounding. Like, can you possibly explain to me how it would be wrong to take away your freedom?
Because if you have an ethical system and an action goes against that, that's unethical according to that system. And so the question is there a system that is objectively correct that we can follow?
If it's just a physical world, I don't see how there could be a better or worse.
Essentially, if you logically contradict yourself, then that is incorrect.
So?
And if you apply that to decisions about human interactions, therefore you can be objectively correct or incorrect on those decisions.
That doesn't make them moral.
That's what the definition of morals is.
No, it's not correct or incorrect. It would be morally praiseworthy or blameworthy. Like I can move a chess piece correctly or incorrectly. I can solve a math equation correctly or incorrectly. That doesn't mean it's moral. There's no moral dimension to that necessarily.
No.
So in this physical world, why is there a better? Why should I think that there's some sort of ought?
Because oughts can usually come from ifs. If you want this, then you ought to do that. There are a few oughts that we can derive from an is. But so if you're trying to follow the moral system, you ought to follow it.
I don't think you've defined a moral system. What it sounds like you're saying is, if I want to achieve some goal, then I have a method to do it. It doesn't seem like that's a moral system, though.
Well, you can get an ethical system just by defining rules of behavior, but there are invalid ways of doing that.
Okay. But if you have a system of behavior, then how could any other system be wrong? Like, what's the grounding for thinking that it's wrong? Like, what is it inconsistent with?
Itself
How is
or reality.
your freedom inconsistent with itself?
If you act to use your freedom, but you act to mitigate others' freedoms, that's a contradiction.
I disagree. No, I think it's a different statement to say I am using my freedom and you are not using yours, or I am using my freedom and I'm stopping you from using your freedom. I don't think that those are contradictions. Contradiction would be I am using my freedom and I am not using my freedom.
But there is a valid way, or there are no valid ways that you could recommend to someone to use their freedom and disregard other freedoms. That's where the contradiction lies.
I don't think there's, based on what you've been offering, I don't think there's any valid way to say anything should be.
Should be
Yeah, like there's
existent.
no ought. There's no ought. So you can't make an argument that I need to respect your freedom.
I do if we're talking about an ethical system.
But what's the grounding ethical system?
So if you want to be correct, then yeah, follow the system.
According to what? Your idea of what's ethical? Are you inventing an ethical system? Why would I take you as the standard? What's ethical?
Anyone can invent one.
So maybe I'll say something here, like just for I'm just trying to move the conversation a little bit. So when I was listening to a lecture yesterday, he was talking about normative ethics, and he was talking about as opposed to psychology, and he said that psychological evidence shows us like what people believe. It's kind of descriptive, but like normative claims about ethics rather is about what people should do, right? Even if all people on the earth believe that it was good to do a certain action, let's say, if that's not what they should do, then it could still be incorrect. Snick, are you disagreeing with that? Like that there's that normative dimension to it?
I totally disregard normative ethics. I don't think, because you could have any norm. So
but what you're saying with that is that you disregard that there's any ought to ethics.
No, because I don't derive an ought from just normativity. I mean, you could say if you don't want to get beaten up by the mob, you ought to play along. But that doesn't address a moral question. That addresses a survival question. So a better way that I would term it is,
when you make a moral claim, do you not like say that people ought to follow it, for example?
When I make a false claim, you said?
No, I'm saying like when you make a moral claim, don't you think that people ought follow it?
If it's valid. So I would use the term universally applicable behavior, which I kind of stole from Stefan Molyneux. He has universally preferable behavior, but I didn't think that was quite good enough.
Mm-hmm.
So the universally applicable behavior, there are objectively sound and unsound ways to model this, and that's essentially what I'm trying to describe.
But by objective, do you mean that it, regardless of human opinion, it is what ought be followed? Because that is a normative claim.
Well, ought be followed by whom?
I'm just asking, like, if there's some moral claim that is objective, ought it be followed because it's objective?
Yes, I would just characterize
normative ethics then, because that's all normative ethics are ethics that imply that there's an ought.
Isn't that deontological ethics?
No, deontology just is a rule-based ethics rather than a consequentialist-based ethics. Normative ethics is the question about oughtness. So it's when you're considering something, it's how one ought to act morally instead of a claim that well, it's just a subjective impression I get, or something to that effect. And I just wanted to clarify that way when we move forward with the conversation, it's not like I see where you're both coming from on this, because I already know Nick's position. So.
But wouldn't you have oughts under Christian moral theory?
Yeah, I do believe that ethics are normative, like an objective. Like I don't see that you were saying that you don't buy into normative ethics, and then you said there's an objective something in ethics, and then I thought, well, like how do you get something objective that shouldn't be followed? That doesn't, and that's why I was like, how do you get a normative ethic that's objective that you shouldn't follow? It just didn't seem to follow for me.
No, that's my bad. I was meaning normative ethics in that it's just defined by the norms of the time. But I guess that's wrong, technically.
Okay, sorry if I interrupted. I just wanted to clarify that because what you were saying seemed to be. I was trying to figure out exactly where you landed on those things. But go ahead back with Nick, or if you want to.
Yeah, I was just going to say I would characterize it as not as ought to be followed regardless of human existence, but I would just characterize it as true regardless of human existence.
Yeah, but I don't know why I'd be morally obligated to behave in any particular way, according to this thing that you're offering, this ethics that you're offering.
Well, an obligation is not like a tangible thing. It would be, the obligation lies in, are you going to act illogically or logically?
Okay, so you're not talking about morality then?
Well, I am, because there are logical and illogical ways to do morality.
Not if there's no morality.
So what do you mean by morality then? Because I mean a system of behavior.
Okay, I mean that there are certain actions that are praiseworthy or blameworthy, morally speaking, whether we want to do them or we like them or not.
Yeah, I would say those are the same thing.
Okay, so give me an example of something that I ought to do, whether I want to or not.
You ought to behave in universally applicable ways.
Why?
That's the only logical way to behave. Otherwise, you're contradicting yourself.
Then your ought is a procedural ought. It's not a moral ought. You're not telling me I'm morally blameworthy. You're just telling me I'm illogical.
You are blameworthy of being illogical.
That's not morally blameworthy.
But what do you think happens if you're morally blameworthy? Do you get like a spiritual goop on you?
No, it has to do with your relationship with this standard. Like I'm not a Christian.
Yeah, so
I don't believe in some sort of judgment or something.
So if you
final sense.
If you have a bad relationship with the truth, could you say that that's possible?
I don't know what you mean. Like, could you be ignorant? Sure, but I don't see somebody being ignorant as necessarily a moral issue, unless they have some sort of they need to. They're instructed that they ought to pursue rationality in some way and understanding and knowledge. I think that could be true, but that's beginning from the ought, that you ought to pursue these things. In this idea where there's just a physical world, I don't understand how would you objectively define something as better than others?
Because if it adheres to a universally applicable standard, then that's sound. You can say that this is okay, and the others are incorrect because they're not resonant with the truth. They're discordant. And that carries natural consequences, but I'm not a consequentialist.
So what you're saying is if there were an objective standard, then certain actions would be morally praiseworthy or blameworthy. And what I'm asking you is, if it's just a physical world, how could there be an objective standard? How could any system be better than any other? Why would it be better for one chess arrangement than another chess arrangement? They just seem to be different chess arrangements.
It just depends on what you mean by better.
I mean that I would be morally blameworthy for setting up a chess arrangement in a particular way. That doesn't make sense to me.
No, because chess isn't really, that's not a moral question.
Exactly, and neither would be a purely physical world. I don't understand how you would order that as, oh, these molecules should be over here. That would be morally better. Bad molecules.
Well, here's an example: is just talking about pure molecules, and this is a fairly petty example, but if you have 10 flavors of ice cream versus one flavor of ice cream, the 10 flavors is morally better because of the arrangement of the molecules. There are more states of freedom, more options, and that means that there's more existence, essentially, or more
So
potential existence.
Single flavored ice cream is morally blameworthy, according to your view.
It's morally lesser than.
Okay.
Well,
The other one is praiseworthy, I should say, I guess. The single ice cream is praiseworthy, but 10 more praiseworthy.
Why?
More states of freedom.
Why is that better?
More states of existence.
Why is that better?
Well, it would seem that reality is saying that that it's better to exist than not to exist, because non-existence at the most extreme end is illogical.
There are so many things that I don't accept about that series of claims. I don't think that it's going to make any sense to anybody in the audience either when you're saying 10 flavors of ice cream is morally better than one flavor of ice cream, or that a physical universe wants there to be more options. I don't know where you're getting that from.
Well, a lot of people think it makes sense, but I'll
Yeah,
try
like
to
if
explain it better.
Maybe
Let me ask this question, and maybe it'll help clarify. If there are 10 options, is saying the 10 options themselves, is that an option? Right? Because there are 10 options. I'm just wondering, like, because it seems like the moral dimension to this is that you have to choose one, right? And then you're saying, well, but it'd be better to not to have all of them. But it's like, but is that really making the choice, like the moral choice, right? Because you'll have a choice in morality to do this or do that, right? It'd be like having one flavor or two flavors, or picking one of the two flavors. And what you're saying is, well, no, it's better to have more options. It's better to have both options. And so, like in morality, like in this morality example, comparing to that, like, well, if should I abort this baby for the for the organs before it dies, or should I let it live out its life until it dies? And then you're saying, well, it's better to just have both options. But I'm just wondering, like, well, how is that making a moral choice, though? You get what I'm saying?
Yeah, so it gets more complicated the more valuables you add, or the more variables you add. So sticking with the ice cream example, if getting all 10 flavors breaks your bank, then ultimately that is causing fewer states of freedom. With the abortion example, I would just, since the argument is basically over whether it's murder or not, there's no.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to get into all that. I'm talking about the actual choice itself. Like, you have two choices between ice cream, and you're saying, well, no, I'm not going to. I wouldn't want to choose between one or the other, right? I'd just rather have both. And what I'm saying is, like in moral situations, the reason why the analogy is different is because you have to make a choice, right? And you're saying, well, no, to not choose is better to have both options. But like, it just seems like there's a dilemma there, because you have to make the moral choice and then justify which choice was correct, right? And that's what ethics is. Like, I'm in an ethics course right now, and we're having to read this book right here, The Elements of Moral Philosophy, and like, that's all it is just these situations where it's like, is this right or is this right? Here's the defense of this position, here's the defense of this position, right? And so I guess what I'm trying to say is, like, there are, in moral situations, it's not like you can get all these options. Like, you have to either choose between options, right? And so, I mean, maybe I could be wrong here. I'm just, telling you where I'm lost at in this conversation, and maybe that'll help get back on track somewhere.
Yeah, I've taken a few of those classes. So I didn't mean to get into the abortion argument. So I was just gonna kind of assume that we're talking about murder or something. So having the choice between murder and no murder, extrapolating from the earlier example, having both options, that doesn't really make sense in the end, because so again, the more variables you add, the more complicated it gets. So there are layers and layers and layers of why that doesn't work, but most simply, it would probably have to do with the fact that, so you're not actually having a choice between murder and no murder. It's actually kind of, there are situations in which it is moral to kill in order to defend yourself. And then on that spectrum, all the way on the other end is murder, which is killing without need. And so basically, you can decide what kind of killing is moral based on how many states of freedom that it preserves. If that makes any sense.
I don't know where you're grounding states of freedom as being moral. If you think that the universe is the standard of what is good, then it seems that different states of the universe would be equally good.
Well, I'm also grounding it in universally applicable behavior. But I think it will kind of illuminate.
Are you saying universe? I'm trying to get like what that term was. Universally applicable behavior? Is that what you're saying?
Yes.
Okay. So by universal, you're almost meaning objective, right?
Well, yeah, it is objective. There's some objective standard that is universally applicable to behavior.
Well, like, can I just? I'm sorry, I hate to keep jumping in here, but I'm just trying to get clarifications because I'm trying to figure out where this is going. So, like, a lot of people used to use the term absolute morals instead of objective. But like, if you watch William Lane Craig's debate with Christopher Hitchens, um, William Lane Craig says objective instead of absolute, and you can tell Hitchens has the old school way in mind, the absolute way, and he has a way out of it if you listen to his arguments, which I won't get into. But by saying objective, Christopher Hitchens goes, well, he changed from absolute to objective in this, and I, he said something like, I tip my hat to him for that, or like, I accept the change, and the usual argument he has couldn't work here. So it seems like you're using the term universal and universally applicable. And I'm just trying to figure out like how, like, what can you give me an example of that? And then how is that justifiably universally applicable? Like if that, because I think that might help with it. Because I'm just, we don't hear that used a lot. And I'm thinking, when you say it, I'm thinking absolute, not necessarily mind independent, but like the scope of it.
Yeah, so I wouldn't characterize it as absolute because it is a spectrum. It's not killing is always wrong or lying is always wrong. There's something, I mean, maybe there is an absolute in the sense that reducing freedom is always wrong. I would certainly say that slavery or rape is always wrong because I can't think of any situation where that could be justified. But so the universally applicable behavior comes from the problems that happen with human interaction. So person A wants X, person B wants X, or they both want different things. So they're either fighting over the same thing or fighting over who gets to control what happens. Something like that. And so you can have a standard by which you can solve these disputes, and if the standard cannot be applied, universally, and if it changes based on the subject that you're giving, like, so the king gets to murder, but the peasants don't get to murder. That's an inconsistent standard, so it's not
I
objective.
disagree. I think those are two different people. They're in different conditions. So it may be right for me to have sex with a woman that consents, but it's not right for me to have sex with a child, even if the child is saying all the same words that the woman says.
Well, children can't consent, so.
Well, I would agree. And so I would say that there's a difference based on the conditions of those two people, just like there's a difference between the peasant and the king.
But I don't think you can justify a difference in the condition of two mentally competent adults, no matter what position they're in. Otherwise, that's a fallacy of might makes right.
No, it's not because the king is more powerful. It's because the king is invested with certain authority. And we could talk about what sort of legitimate authorities those could be.
The only legitimate authority is over yourself. And people can
I don't know why I would accept that.
consent because that's the only way you can consistently apply it.
Oh, okay. Then I don't think you believe in morality. I don't
How?
think that you believe in truth. I don't think you believe in objective definitions or standards or whatever. Maybe not objective definitions is a good word. If
So-
you're the only authority and nothing can have authority over you, that is a very nihilistic world.
So it's moral to give the king power to murder, but not others?
There could be contexts in which a king should be treated differently than a child.
A child, but not another adult.
I think another adult too. For instance, if we have somebody that has murdered and somebody that has not murdered, then we should treat them differently.
Yeah, that's based on their actions.
If we have a king that's been invested with authority and somebody that has not been invested in authority, we should treat them differently.
No, because then that corrupts the authority.
Okay. So you're proceeding from, I think, to use your definition of faith, a faith-based position where you don't have any reasons for what you believe. You're just proceeding from moral intuitions and then demanding that we accept them.
Nope, I ignored moral intuitions in all of this reasoning.
Okay, so then why does it corrupt his authority? What is your reason for believing that?
Because if you give excuses to people, then they're with more power, then they're going to use that power for more and more and more.
And why is that bad?
More and more.
Why is that bad?
Because then they're using it. Might makes right.
No, it's not. That doesn't might make right. Just because people will use more power, their rightness or wrongness is not invested in their power.
Correct. So what makes an action different because of someone's rank?
Well, it would have to do with the legitimacy of that rank.
How does the rank affect it?
It's a condition. A police officer should certainly be treated differently than a civilian. If a police officer tells me to pull over on the side of the road, I have a legal obligation to do it. If you tell me to do that, I certainly don't.
Yeah, and I don't see any difference other than for my own safety.
You don't see any difference. So if a police officer asked you to pull over, you would just ignore that.
If it wasn't bad for my safety, yeah.
Okay. Yeah, so I think the issue is because you've been dealing in these camps, you don't even understand the definitions of the things that you're reading, and so you're not able to engage.
More ad hominems.
Well, the ad hominem would be your arguments are wrong
just
because of who you are. But I'm pointing out your arguments are wrong, and it seems like it's because you cannot address them.
Like what? What am I not engaging in that I don't know the definition of?
Like for instance, saying that like when we're talking about the possibility of somebody being invested in authority, you don't seem to understand anything but personal interest. You just have self-interest. That's it.
So I don't understand what authority is.
Yeah, you don't seem to understand what a legitimate authority would be.
No, I'm just questioning what it is. And you're just assuming that it's legitimate because it's bestowed upon someone. I'm saying
no, I did not assume
deeper
that.
there. Okay, then there's something deeper there, right?
Yeah. Some authorities have the power to legitimately bestow authority, and we would be again grounding that in certain standards.
How would we do that?
But
What are we what are we
we
grounding
would
it
say
in?
something like, God has chosen this man to be king, therefore we ought to treat this man as king.
So putting aside how you figure out whether God anointed him or not, how do we know God's choice is good?
Okay, so we're going back to the definition of what God is.
Well,
Yeah,
what
that's
might
the central thing that you guys can't answer.
No, it's the central thing you can't address.
yeah, and maybe this will help because Snake or Taylor, it seems that I'm still trying to understand your sense of morality because like now that you're saying like that it's so you seem to be saying something like that it's not based off intuition, right? You don't think morality is based off of intuition, this universal
No,
applicable
because your
standard.
intuition could be wrong.
Right, right. I agree with that. No, but I do think people intuit their morality. But let's say your universally applicable standard. What? How do you know that? Like, how can somebody comprehend that standard?
We test it with logic.
Okay, and if it's something as logical, like for example, with and I'm just trying to figure out. I'm not arguing with you. I'm just trying to figure out, your position. If we test it through logic, like for example, I'm going to give two examples that are pretty much the same, but they're different scales. Okay, the first example that's given in my ethics book is a baby who's got a degenerative disorder, anencephaly. I could be pronouncing that wrong, of course, but
Anencephaly?
yeah. So
Cephaly?
basically, yeah. So basically, the baby will die. It will die or be stillborn, and the parents want to give the organs before it dies to be used for other children, and the state says, no, that's immoral. We can't use people as means to benefit other people. And another example would be another consequentialist view, which is the utilitarian view, which is yes, but if we only kill 400 people, we could save 150,000 people, for example. Now, logically, if you're just going based off of logic and not intuition at all, I'm just wondering, would any situation like that not be a potential universally applicable logical morale?
Like that, it would follow that we should sacrifice people to harvest their organs.
Well, like in the book, they actually argue that that would have been the correct thing, is to go ahead and have the child be put to death to use these organs for the other children because the child is going to die anyway or be stillborn. Like there's not, basically it's missing the cerebrum and the cerebellum. So like the child's going to, it's only got a brainstem. So the child's going to die or be stillborn anyway. And they go, is it reasonable to kill the child and use the organs while it's still alive? Because if it dies at that point, the organs will be too far gone to use. And so it's like a benefits analysis. And what I'm asking is, it seems like on a logical view like yours, where there's no moral intuition, I'm just wondering, I can see how you would think that that's more of a better standard, the logical approach. But sometimes it seems to me that like it's like the Spock approach, like in the other book I'm reading, the Philosopher's Handbook, or that I'm listening to on Audible. It's a lecture series, and he kind of goes over why the completely logical view or reason, like rationale view, like Spock, he calls it the Spock view. Everything's based on a reason, right? And then he goes, and then the completely intuition view are both wrong, and he kind of argues for like a middle ground. So I'm just wondering, from your perspective, if it's all the logical view, could anything that actually makes sense logically become moral, even if, it doesn't seem very moral? You get where I'm coming from with that, right?
Yeah, and it's not just strictly logical. Like it could be logical. If I want that guy's wallet, I should shoot him and take it. That's a logical step, but that's not a universally applicable logical standard.
Why not? That's what I'm trying to get
Yeah,
to.
it seems like it would be.
Yeah, what makes it that way? Like let's
Okay,
take the
so
example that I gave. Like if it makes sense logically, like, and then it almost seems like you don't want to say it, and I'm not. I mean, I could be wrong. It seems like you or whoever else holds this position would not want to say that is universally applicable because of your intuition about it. You get what I mean?
well, not really the intuition. It's what happens if you universalize the idea that theft or killing and thieving is okay.
So with the example of the baby, right? The state actually ended up changing its position on it, and I think, and some states have like, and so they kind of universalized that position that a child with this degenerative disorder is only got a brain stem, they're all either aborted or come out stillborn, that it's permissible to use their organs, for example. In that context, it seems like a completely logic base, and that the opposing view would be the intuition. And I'm just saying, like, do you think, for example, that would be a universal applicable standard or morale?
What would be the standard that you can kill anything with a pulse for its organs, or
Well, how about this? Like, because I'm not trying to get into the argument. What I'm trying to say is, can you give me one of these universally applicable
oh,
morals and then justify, like, why is that moral, for example?
so I would say that there's no real analogy between killing a random person on the streets for their organs and using and killing something that's going to die tomorrow or in a few hours, because the people on the street, they're going to be there tomorrow. And the standard you could use is, again, just freedom. So is it going to cause more freedom to let the organs go to waste? Is it going to cause more freedom to let the baby just die and then not use its organs? Or is it going to cause more freedom to let it die and use its organs?
Again, I don't see any grounding for your claim that more freedom is morally good for some reason.
So I would be interested to
By
hear
freedom, do you mean autonomy?
good grounding.
Do you mean autonomy when you say freedom?
Not really, but that's part of it. I mean, literally physical states of freedom or potential options. And autonomy would be part of that. Giving everyone autonomy essentially keeps it so that society doesn't degenerate into a state of probably going back to slavery or
So yeah, and that's interesting because one of the things that they argue in the book right here is it says that autonomy is violated when people are forced to do things against their will. This explains why using people like the baby, for example, would be wrong. Is it wrong because it thwarts their autonomy? But taking baby Teresa's organs, however, could not be thwarting her autonomy because she has no autonomy. She cannot make decisions and has no desires. She has nothing but a brainstem. So like that's what I'm getting at is like I don't know. It's just like I'm trying to wrap my mind around it because maybe you got something here, right? But I just when I'm looking at ethical situations, like could you potentially give me like an ethical situation that meets your standard that we would consider as moral that meets this logical approach? And maybe that'll just help to clarify, and then I'll like get out of it. I mean, I'm trying to figure out a situation or an example, an instance of this universally applicable standard, for example.
an instance in which it would be applicable.
Yeah, like can you name a moral thing that meets this criteria that you're get this criterion? And
Well,
yeah, go ahead.
I think your example works fine, or just theft or murder, any of the classical moral questions.
But what's your grounding for your claim that one world is morally better than the other because it has more physical states of freedom?
The logic of existence.
The logic of existence. That sounds like something that Deepak Chopra would say.
Maybe. So what do you think would ground it? Because
If there's an objective standard rooted in the nature of God, that would do it.
why would it being rooted in the nature of God make it legitimate? How is that a grounding for anything?
Well, the reason why it could be a grounding there, but it couldn't be a grounding in the universe is because if the universe is good, if it's the standard of goodness, then there is no state of the universe that could be better. There's no state of God that can be better. It's been asked a couple times. I've been asked, can God choose his nature? No, he can't. His nature is necessary.
Yeah, so there you go, Brenda. Brenda's been asking that a bunch, and I mean, I almost wanted to just say, like, can you can't change a necessary nature, like you can't choose a necessary, But I wanted to let Nicholas answer that question.
Yeah, but we could certainly imagine different states of the universe, and if the state of the universe is the standard of goodness, then any state would be equally good. I don't know what grounding you would have to say that one state is better. You say the logic of existence, and maybe you do have some sort of secret, mysterious knowledge, but you're not transmitting it to us.
Same to you. You just define God as perfect, and therefore he is good, and that's not good enough.
Okay, so your objection doesn't seem to characterize my view, where we're saying if God was good, then we could have this logical system. Instead, what you're saying is you're just saying God is good.
Yeah.
Right. And so let's say I am just claiming God exists. I still have a logically coherent view in that case. You don't. I'm asking you for you to present as good of a speculative view as I have.
I'm asking you what would count as something that's grounding reality or grounding morality.
It would be an objective standard.
Yeah, why can't that objective standard be universally applicable behavior?
No. The
I may be
universally applicable behavior wouldn't be a standard, right?
I may not know what the system of universally applicable behavior is, but if there was such a thing, could that not ground morality?
No. How could it? How would that be moral?
That's it's just a tautology, really. It's the same thing. Objective morality is the right and wrong ways of behaving.
Okay, but objective reality is always true. So there's no better or worse.
Yeah, but you can influence what reality is with your decisions.
So it's still reality.
So the greater states of freedom, you're maximizing reality, which is
no. I don't consider greater states of freedom to be maximizing reality. I don't know why you would think that.
Because if you're constricting the degrees of freedom, there's less stuff in reality.
Sure. And why is that worse?
Well, I ground that in the fact that something exists at all.
Why does something existing at all mean that there is goodness in the world?
Well, that's how you get an ought from an is.
I don't think it is, because you haven't delineated how we're getting the ought from the is. The is would be that there is a moral standard.
But why can't that standard be a type of behavior which is flawless in its implementation?
Well, you're sneaking a lot of things in with flawless, but a type of behavior, what would ground it being moral? Where's the standard?
So I'm just trying to reduce morality to its simplest parts. It would be a standard of flawless behavior. Can we agree?
I'm not even sure.
By a god or something else.
I'm not even sure because I'm trying to get you to ground an objective standard in something other than God. And so far you haven't been able to do that, and you have rejected that you're proceeding from moral intuition. So I'm trying to get your argument.
Let me add one more thing here, because this might clarify. So it seems to me, when I'm thinking about this, and Taylor, you brought this to my mind whenever you said a minute ago about universally applicable being a standard, and then Nicholas said, well, like, how is that a standard? And I was thinking, well, universally applicable just kind of means the same thing as ought, doesn't it? Like,
As what?
As ought, like, you ought do this, like it's applicable, it's universally applicable. Seems like it's kind of another word for ought. It might have a little different connotation, but you get where I'm coming from with that. Like, something that you ought to do is universally applicable, it seems like. And so maybe that'll help, because I'm still trying to understand your model, basically.
Yeah, I would say so. Maybe more nitpicky, I would say you ought to follow universally applicable behavior if you want to be moral.
According to what standard?
The definition of morality.
Why would we accept your definition of morality?
It's not my definition.
Yeah, you're using really atypical definitions, yeah. When I ask you for a standard and you say, oh, it's the definition of morality, you seem to have this definition of morality that it must be greater degrees of physical freedom, which I've never heard before. It seems like nonsense.
I'm sure you've heard it said in different ways. A lot of people ground their morality in freedom.
No, more physical states of freedom. I have never heard anybody ever argue that.
Yeah,
I don't know why a particle that could be in 10 places is morally better than a particle that could be in 3. That doesn't make any sense to me.
You probably haven't heard it in those terms, but that's what freedom means.
Well, I know what degrees of freedom are in a system, but I don't see why that would be moral. That doesn't make sense. And just so you know, I'm proceeding from a position that academics understand and believe has some grounding in it. And that doesn't mean it does have any grounding in it. It just means other people understand what I'm communicating. I don't think anybody understands what you're trying to communicate if you do have some sort of insight.
No, a lot of people I talk to understand what it is. I think the conflict is in whether we're grounding it in God or not.
No, the conflict is that you haven't grounded it.
And I don't think you've grounded it either. Just saying
Okay, so
God doesn't change anything about the argument.
So one more thing here. One more thing. Sorry to keep jumping in, because I'm just trying to help, like, move the conversation. So maybe it would help if, like, Taylor, do you have okay? So are you familiar with the distinction of difference or improvement or difference? Are you familiar with that at all?
Improvement or difference?
Yeah. Like, I'll give, so if you say this is an improvement to, like we don't, we allow for abortion now, and it's an improvement on where we come from, like from when we didn't allow it. And then you could say, like, from a more subjective opinion, it's like, we allow abortion today and it's different from when we didn't allow it. You get what I'm saying? Like, there is
Mhm.
is moral standards, like, are, I mean, and what I mean is, on your view, is moral actions, are they just different, or can one be an improvement? And here's the thing is, like, if you're improving, it seems like you're improving toward a standard. So if I say, killing is better than, or not killing is better than, or not murder is better than murder. I'm assuming that there's a standard by which, if I say it's better, that it's closer to the standard. So maybe that'll help. And again, I'm just trying to clarify. So
I would say that the improvement is in its logical validity.
So but are you just saying that the standard is logic validity, right? And
I would say it supports the standard. Or you can check the standard with logic, something like that.
so like the examples that we talked about earlier, like if something seems logically on a cost benefit analysis, for example, if something is logically makes sense, like killing one person to save 5 other people in the hospital, for example, is that if it makes sense logically, but it doesn't meet our moral intuitions, could that be an improvement on just letting the person that's dying anyway die? I'm just asking the question. Like,
Well, you've got more variables. So on the small scope, it might look like, okay, we sacrifice 5 to save 10. That's a cost benefit analysis. That's a net 5 people. But you can't actually run a society like that in the macro scale.
why is that? I'm just wondering.
If anyone can just be shut down at any time, just taken out for the benefit of someone else, no one would form a society, and everything would crumble, and there would be basically no reason for morality at all.
So there may be this standard, but that the standard is unrealistic or not applicable in that way.
Only depending on what scale you're looking at it. If you're just looking at how many people can we save, then it might appear at first that way. But if you take a step back and look at the standard applied to the whole society, which the hospital is only one part of, then you get the whole picture.
Okay, because I just see like the one example and then scaling the one example and still getting all the logic out of it, right? And I'm just wondering, like, because it seems like if you're saying like this could be universally applicable, but at scale it wouldn't be applicable. Because it wouldn't work at scale. And so
like if there was only a certain amount of room on a lifeboat and you had to throw a couple people off, the Earth isn't a lifeboat. You can't scale that up to society. That example is contained within the lifeboat.
So but it would be the moral thing to do to go ahead and throw those people off to save the rest?
If the whole thing was going to sink, then yeah.
Okay, that would be the moral thing. And so that throwing those people off is better than not throwing those people off, for example.
Well, they're going to die either way, so might as well save as many as you can.
Okay. So that's what I'm saying is like, so that is a consequentialist view then. But you're saying it just doesn't work when you scale it. Is that right?
Well, the killing people for their organs wouldn't work when you scale it.
Okay, so here's my last question.
If you could only fit a certain amount of people on a space shuttle and the Earth was the lifeboat that was sinking, or the ship that was sinking, maybe you could scale it that way. But
okay, so here's my last question. So you said that something is moral if it's universally applicable. And then we have this thing that you just called moral, which is throwing somebody off of a lifeboat, right? So that would be, according to your view, it'd be universally applicable. But then you're saying that, but on the scale, it's not applicable. But how is that universal applicability? See, because it seems like you can't have any universal thing that's applicable at a small scale and at a large scale. But then, like, how is it universal? And I'll jump out. But that's like the last thing I was wondering is just like, how is it universal if it only works at a small scale? You know.
Well, it doesn't only work on a small scale. It is scalable to the entire Earth. With the space shuttle example, it's just that the implications of that standard don't apply to wider society because the entire society is not currently scrambling to get lifeboats from a sinking ship. So you could scale that. It's just that the moral implications are isolated to that one boat. If all of society was going down, the same ethic could apply at the larger scale.
Okay, but not so much in the other one about the hospital, right?
Well, that's kind of the opposite effect, where if you're looking at the incomplete picture, then at first it might seem like you could apply the standard one way. But if you're actually looking at the whole picture, because if you have a hospital that has this policy, that's going to have society-wide implications. So you have to be able to scale it to the entire society, some kind of ethic about whether you can kill people, because it's not just isolated to this one example.
So I guess sorry to say something else here after I said that. But like with the consequential view like that, like if you look at an example, okay, and you go, we got one guy that's dying, and there's 5 people that could use his organs in this hospital. Okay. The moral thing to do would be to use this guy's organs and save the 5 people that are dying. That would be the moral thing to do on consequentialism. Now I'm saying is all you do is scale that up to, hey, listen, 100,000 people die and 3 million people get saved. It doesn't. It only changes in size. It doesn't change in the moral factor. Only the scale of it changes. But it seemed like earlier you said, well, no, that's when you scale it, it doesn't work. That's what I thought you were saying.
I'm saying the implications are different because the scale of it is not actually contained to the hospital. The scale is society-wide. If we're going to say, okay, you can kill this healthy person or relatively healthy person to save this other person.
Right, but just any example, like you kill one person to save 5. You kill 100,000 people to save 500,000. Like any example, it does, like you don't have to look at the specific necessarily. It's just the ethic of doing it. It's like if the small scale example is moral, then it seems like it would follow that on the macro it would be the same ethic, just at scale. Like when you're looking at business models, for example, you find an ethical business model and then you scale it so that it brings more of a benefit to you rather than just doing it on a small scale, for example. And so that's what I'm wondering is just like, because if you can't scale it, then it's not universal in that way. And that's where I'm getting hung up at, I guess. I don't know. Maybe it's just the term universal. Maybe.
Well, I'm saying you can scale it. It just might look different if you're not looking at the whole scale.
Okay, I mean, go ahead. Sorry. Nick, do you want to jump in?
Well, I will just say that the purpose of this discussion was to talk about whether or not an objective moral standard could be rooted in God's nature, and whether or not that is another option as opposed to the 2 options that were being offered. We've kind of gotten down a track because I think that the Snake doesn't really understand the terms that he's trying to engage with. And then we spoke about this other hypothetical moral system that I don't think anyone, including myself, understands what you're trying to communicate if there is some sort of logic to that. It seems like he's presented a lot of really strong intuitions and given us no reason to accept those intuitions. And so he talks about this universal applicability principle, and yet he does not seem to have any respect for what could be different conditions, like, for instance, different stations of authority, to the point where it seems like he is going entirely off moral intuition. And so he is just able to discount cases like a king could have authority where a peasant would not. And so referring to some of the comments here, I certainly did not demonstrate that an objective moral standard exists, and I don't think that was the purpose of this discussion. We're just talking about whether or not the Euthyphro is actually a dichotomy or not.
Yeah, so how is anything rooted in God's nature? How is that different than it being rooted in God, who is defined by his nature?
It would be rooted in God's nature, rooted in God. That's right, which is not one of the options in the dichotomy.
Why does just saying it's rooted in God's nature anything more than your intuition?
Okay, well, that's a different question. I haven't made any sort of arguments for why that's true, because today
know.
we weren't arguing for whether or not my particular view on God was true. We're talking about whether or not Euthyphro is a dichotomy, and I think I've demonstrated that it's not.
That's at the heart of Euthyphro's dilemma.
No,
That's what
epistemology
it's
is not
for.
the question.
It's asking,
No,
why should I trust your God standard?
it's not a dichotomy because it's an epistemological
Okay,
question.
well, the point of it is to question, why is the standard of the gods good? And you can't provide anything for that.
So maybe you can concede that it's not a dilemma then, right?
I think it's irrelevant. I'll say that. I'll concede it for this argument, but that is not my position.
That was been my position. That's the only thing I've been trying to defend, and also I've been attacking your view that you could ground an objective standard of morality in the nature of the universe.
But
those are my only 2 points there.
But you can't defend what you think it actually is the grounding.
I don't need to defend it. That wasn't my point here. That wasn't my point here.
That was my point to be here. That's the whole point of Euthyphro's
dilemma.
dilemma.
Then converse. If the point of this discussion was not on whether or not the Euthyphro was a dichotomy or not, then it should have been transmitted to me that I should be convincing other people that my views on God are accurate, because that's a totally different discussion.
Yeah. So no, I just put that it was about the Euthyphro dilemma. Yeah. So I see what you're saying. Like if there is the third position, there is this other position that is not accounted for in the Euthyphro dilemma, then it is not in fact a dilemma. Is what Nicholas is arguing. And if it is not in fact a dilemma, then there's no discussion on that. Now we want to move toward Nick's personal epistemology or whatever the case may be. I mean, you could just ask, Christian, like, what's your epistemology? Like, how do you know what God's nature is? And they can, resort to scripture or whatever the case is. And one more thing here is that Nicholas is a theist, but he's not even a Christian. Like, so it's not like you're, arguing with some fundamentalist Christian on this. He's like,
fine.
So I'm just saying, like, if you maybe, so that is the whole thing. Is the Euthyphro dilemma an actual dilemma? Now, my argument on that, we've kind of spoke before, that it's not, because I think that it's asking, is God good, because of something is like saying the good is what God is. But with his argument, he's just saying, like, he's giving that it's rooted in God's nature as an argument to say that that's another option. And I think unless you have a defeater for that, you have to concede. Now, you can say, well, I don't have a defeater for it now, but I could come up with one, or maybe there is one or something like that. But in order to progress in a conversation, it seems like we have to concede some ground unless we have a defeater for a position. Like in philosophy, if you don't have a defeater for a position, you either have to concede that ground, or you have to say, I need to get back to the drawing board and find a defeater for that position, for example.
Well, I would say the defeater is that God is defined by his nature, so it's not actually creating a third option. You're just you're paraphrasing it. If you can't show how grounding things in God's nature is different from grounding it in God, then you haven't proved your side either. And
you're not addressing my position, because I would say those statements are equivalent.
Your grounding is just as relevant as mine, so I don't see why you don't want to defend it. Okay,
so what you just stated and saying, oh, it's you need to show how it's different if it's rooted in God versus rooted in God's nature. That shows you don't understand my position, because I do think those are equivalent statements.
Then it's not a third option.
No, those statements are not one of the options of the Euthyphro dilemma.
If it's holy because it's loved by God,
that's not his nature.
He loves things.
I could love ice cream today and hate it tomorrow.
That is his nature, though. His love is defined by his nature.
No, his love proceeds from his nature.
Especially if it's a perfect nature. Then
it proceeds from his nature. Do you understand the difference?
No, because that's what it. That's all it's getting at.
I drive the car. That's why the car gets somewhere. It's not that the car drives me.
That has nothing to do with the discussion.
It's talking
discussion
about
is
the causal
whether-
relationship. It's the causal relationship. It is not
So-
because it's beloved by God that it is good.
Right. That's false. But that question, is it beloved by God, is bringing up the God's nature.
No, it's not.
Yes, it is. It's a
No,
question.
it's if you read the Euthyphro, it's addressing the relationship between the gods and that thing, and they specifically say that's not a quality, and that's Socrates' objection to it. He says that's not a quality, that's an attribute. And what he's saying is, no, you're not saying that there's something about the gods or something about this thing that makes it good. You're saying that it is good because it's loved by the gods, and that's just an attribute of it. It has nothing to do with its essential nature, or anything's essential nature.
If he loves something, it's because of his nature.
Right. But it's not because he loves it that it is good.
Mm-hmm. So saying that it's because of his nature is essentially the same fallacy.
No, it is not the same.
Yes, it is.
Okay, well, read the Euthyphro.
God's opinions, God's love. You can use whatever synonym you want.
You read the Euthyphro and look for where there's an objection to the idea that it's rooted in God's nature.
It doesn't matter.
Okay.
If he loves something, it's because of his nature. What makes that nature special?
Well, if there is objective morals in the world, just like according to the moral ontology argument, if there are more objective morals in the world, then we have one possible grounding for that, and that would be God.
You can't ground anything in his love, and you can't ground anything in his...
I didn't ground anything in his love.
And you can't ground anything in his nature.
Why can't I ground something in his nature?
Explain to me how you do that. I would love to know.
God is the objective standard of what is good, and so we can, according to that standard, measure what would be good or not.
Okay, well, why can't I just define my position as the objective standard?
Well, okay. Are you objective? Like, are you the origin of all creation? Because if you are, you could be.
It's just part of the definition I use, and if you argue anything else, you're using a straw man. That's your argument.
No, because the thing is...
Yeah, it's part of my definition, so you have to tangle with the fact that I'm saying that I have the objective truth. Because it's part of my definition. That's what you're doing.
No, I'm not just defining it and reifying it into existence. I'm talking about if there were this sort of being. So if you're claiming you're that sort of being, then yeah, maybe that could be the objective standard of morality. If you're the origin of all creation, I'm totally willing to accept that you could be a standard of morality, and that if there is morality, you must be the origin of it. And it's not going to be about your love or not, because that's a different issue.
How does being the origin of creation logically mean that you define the standard? Everything
exists, is contingent on God's nature. And therefore, it makes sense that we can see that everything is going to be defined according to that. It proceeds from it.
Let me give a real life example.
Well, can I ask this real quick?
Go ahead.
I just want to ask, what if this origin is not a mind?
I don't know exactly what you're talking about there, but if we're going to get to this, like, what would it mean for this thing to have a nature where certain things are correct or not correct, and it being separate? Well, I think the issue would actually run into more the creation of the universe. If it doesn't have a mind, then we just don't get off the ground. Let's see. Let me think about this really hard. Okay, if there's a thing that does not have a mind, could it be the objective standard? Like if there's a Quran floating that's eternal. Yeah. I think that could work. Yeah, it couldn't be the universe because then everything would be equally good. But it could be something outside the universe that's the origin of the universe. I would make arguments against something that does not have a mind being able to do that, but that'd be a separate discussion.
So maybe I can rephrase, like maybe I can give the Euthyphro with a specific example, and then we can see a little more clearly, and I'll let you guys talk about that. So like take for example, murder. Is murder, let's put that in the Euthyphro formula. Is murder wrong because God commands it, or is murder wrong, or is it God's command? I'm sorry. Let me rephrase this. Is murder wrong because God forbids it, or is it forbidden because it's wrong? Is that right?
Sounds right to me.
Well,
Okay.
you're changing beloved to forbid, but
Or yeah,
and I would say neither is true. It's
right.
not.
And
It's
Yeah,
the same idea.
yeah, so that's what I was getting at. Is like the third. I can see the third option. It's like it's not because it's wrong that God forbids it, but rather it's because of God's the answer is rooted in God's nature rather than
right.
God's like thought process, like
Yeah,
the fact
yeah.
that yeah.
But God's nature might be to be correct. So
So
that mean that it's just independent of God?
I don't know what it means to be like to be your nature to be correct, but
So
if you're talking about the classical theistic God, then we can examine that, or you could talk about, like, if you could properly define it's in its nature to be correct. I don't know what that means. Like, are you just saying it's infallible?
kind of.
Okay,
So
well, then we can talk about if there's an infallible being, then we know any statement it makes will not be false, right? As long as it's truthful.
yeah, but
Any inference it makes will not be false. So we can talk about the entailments of that kind of an idea, just like we can talk about the entailments of a classical theistic God.
yeah, and I don't actually have a problem with an infallible being, other than we have no reason to believe it exists. But conceptually, however, the question is, how do we know it's infallible? How would we test this?
That's an epistemological question, and the Euthyphro is not an epistemological dilemma.
It is. It's asking what the nature.
It is not asking how can we know. No, it's not asking how can we know. It's not asking how can we know.
It basically is.
It is not.
Yeah, it is.
No, it is offering two logical options, which is why this is presented as a dichotomy. If you're trafficking in circles that they're telling you that the Euthyphro dilemma is a dilemma about epistemology, you should find new circles.
Because we're asking, why is something good?
No, well, why is something good is not the same thing as how can we know something is good. Those are two different questions.
No, they're not.
yeah, so it seems to me that like it's not asking like how do we come to know that God commands something because it's good or not. Like it does seem like it's more of an ontological question. Like, is the fact that something's good grounded in the fact that God ordered it? Or, it does seem more like an ontological question than how can we know that God ordered it because of this or that? Like that does seem like a separate question to me, just like to give my opinion.
Yeah,
So
no informed person is going to take it as an epistemological dilemma.
Except that's what it is. So would we be able
Let's state all our chips on the table. I'm going all in on that claim that this is not an epistemological dilemma. And if I'm wrong about this, everybody in the audience should just discount everything that I said throughout the entire conversation, because I obviously can't understand what I'm reading if this is an epistemological dilemma of how can we know what is good.
Yeah, so if you're saying that we know that something is infallible because of its nature is good, then we have to ask, how do we know that?
Maybe we do have to, but that would be a different question. That's not the Euthyphro dilemma.
That's what it's for, is what I'm saying.
Okay, and I'm putting all my chips on the table and saying to everyone that's listening that if it's an epistemological dilemma, I am not capable of reading the Euthyphro and understanding it, and you should just discount my claims about it. You should read it for yourself, because if that's what he's really asking, is how can we know that what is beloved by the gods is good, rather than there are these two options, and it seems like if you go through either of these two options, it becomes circular and self-refuting, then I obviously don't understand what I was reading.
Yeah.
And I should just be laughed at. I should be criticized for even entering in a conversation and making such silly claims as this is not an epistemological dilemma.
Well, don't be too hard on yourself.
Oh, I'm not.
But that's what it's for. It's trying to understand what the nature of good is.
Right, but not how we come to know what is good, right? Because that is a different.
How we explore what we have to ask questions like that.
But that's
'Cause, like-
not the question that's being asked here.
We
That's what
have to ask how you know that.
But that's not the question that's being asked in the dilemma.
Yeah, but there's questions about the dilemma, and we have to ask how do we know that?
That's not the dilemma itself, though.
Yeah, but it's addressing certain ideas and questions like what is the nature of good?
But if you don't understand what the dilemma is to begin with, how can we address how we would know which of the options is true?
What do you think it's for?
Well, I've explained it several times. It is a claim that there is this dichotomy, a logical dichotomy. There's only two logical possibilities. Either things are holy because they're beloved by the gods, or the gods love those things because they're holy. And I have offered a third logical position, and I'm not under any sort of burden to show that's true, because my only point in this conversation, well, it seems I've made 3 points, really. The first point would be that it's not a true logical dichotomy. The second point would be that this is not an epistemological dilemma. It's not presented that way. It's not taken that way. And the third would be your example of grounding morality in the universe is nonsensical.
But you haven't presented anything from your side, and your grounding is just as relevant as mine. And so the Euthyphro dilemma is part of our epistemological process of exploring the nature of what good is.
I concede.
It's an attempt. Sorry, go ahead.
I concede that I have made no attempt to give an epistemological route for understanding things other than the moral ontology argument.
That's what you've been grilling me on all night. How do you know that? How do you know that? But when I turn it around on you, you have
no. I haven't been asking you, how do you know that the universe would be the grounding for an objective morality? I'm asking you, how could the universe be the grounding for an objective morality where more states of degrees of physical freedom would be considered morally praiseworthy? I don't understand what you mean by that. I'm not asking you to prove that it's true. I'm trying to get you to explain how that would even be consistent.
Yeah, so that's just semantics. You're asking me, how do I know these things?
If what you're saying doesn't have semantic meaning, then I don't understand what you're saying. And I am not asking you the epistemological question of how did you learn these things. I am saying, what is the meaning to the statements you're trying to give?
Yeah, and you understand the meanings, you just don't understand.
No, I do not understand. And based on the very, very small sample size, I don't think anybody else in the audience understands either.
Okay,
speaking, so you understand.
I'm going to share one thing here. I'm going to share my screen real quick because I looked up something I think might help clarify this. It's just the Wikipedia, so it's like obviously it's not some type of like scholarly article. Are you guys able to see that?
Yep.
Okay, so in this, it says, and I was just reading here at the bottom, it says, well, I mean, we can read through all this, but it says, thus Euthyphro's theory does not give us the very nature of the pious, but at most the quality. And I think that's what Nick's trying to argue here, is that it's the difference between the nature and the quality, right? And that's his argument of the third dilemma there, is that God doesn't command something because the quality of it is pious, but rather because of his nature. And so maybe I thought that might help clarify, but I mean, maybe I just made it worse. I don't know.
And I'm asking you what you mean by his nature.
Quality and attribute, but yeah.
And I'm asking you what you mean by his nature. Because it's basically nonsense. It's just an empty word for you to avoid the actual question from what I'm seeing. So when I ask what is his nature, or how do you know what his nature is good, I'm basically just trying to understand, what do you mean? So this we are doing the exact same thing to each other.
Because I haven't made any claims that you would need to ask those questions yet.
Yeah, you have. You claimed that there's a third option that is rooted in God's nature, and I'm trying to
and giving any details, giving any account of details of that nature is not part of that position.
So that's why I asked you, what separates a nature from the God's love,
well,
or loving it because of its qualities. God would love certain things because of its nature. So it seems like
that's right. And it wouldn't be that God has a nature because he loves certain things. That would be backwards. And if you read the Euthyphro, actually, Socrates goes through a few examples of that, like being led or leading the cart.
So what do you mean by it's grounded in his nature?
I mean that's the objective standard of morality. And so if we were able to make a claim about God's nature, then we could know what is moral in relation to that.
But how does that work? How do you get a system of ethics from this nature? Just whatever God says?
No,
what does this nature consist of?
Voluntaristic divine command theory. So that would be very similar to one of the horns there. It would be like saying, is it holy because God beloves it? Is it beloved because it's holy, or is it loved because it's holy? Those two options. Or you could change it a little bit and say, this would also be very close to the Euthyphro dilemma. Is it holy because God commands it, or does God command it because it's holy? And it wouldn't be according to either of those. It's not that that he recognizes something as holy outside of himself, because according to the concept of God. So again, we're dealing with this concept of God, just like the hypothetical infallible being you mentioned earlier. We can look at the entailments of that, and so if he has a nature, which is the standard of morality, then we know there is a third option for the grounding of morality that wouldn't be based on what he loves or commands, if you want to change it to that one, and it wouldn't be based on him recognizing something outside himself.
So if we could find out or test in some way that he's infallible, we'd already have the description of morality without that being.
No, because if the being didn't exist, there would be no existence. There would be no morality.
But who cares? What if its nature is to make existence so it can torture things?
If there is morality in that universe, then it is good to make things to torture things. Now, that would go against my moral intuitions, and I hope it goes against yours. But then we'd be relying on other cases, or maybe we could talk about epistemological routes we would take to refute that. But the idea in itself is not logically incoherent.
It is logically incoherent, because you can get incoherent things like that torture is okay as long as you're the one who made it.
How is torture is okay logically incoherent?
Because it's a standard of I get to torture you, but you don't get to torture me.
So
or there's no you can't apply any logical standard to that.
Are you under some assumption that you and I are worthy of the same treatment?
There's no other way to do it.
Okay. I definitely don't think that we're worthy of the same treatment. Like, for instance, I would not recommend that someone listen to you to understand what the Euthyphro dilemma is, but I would certainly recommend someone listen to me.
Yeah, I can say the same thing. Are you impressed? Ooh.
You're in college, right? Well, okay, so then that would go against what you just said earlier. You're in college, right?
No, I agreed with your description of it. Yes, I am.
Okay, so and
I've taken these classes and got A's in them.
Okay,
I've taken philosophy of religion. I got an A in it.
Well, before you said that, I was going to say I would guess that whatever you're taking your studies in, you're more of an expert in the research than I am. But if it was philosophy, then I don't think your education has done you any good.
Yeah, I do biology.
Biology.
The arguments
there we go. I bet you're so much more familiar with the research in biology, and I think that somebody should respond to you differently when you talk about biology than they respond to me.
No, because the arguments don't change. The argument is true or false regardless of who's making it.
One of us is in college studying biology and one of us isn't. That would be a different condition.
Okay, I wouldn't be correct just because I'm studying biology.
No, but it is a different situation.
No, I would never ask you to take my word for it because I'm a biologist.
You don't. Okay, so why are you going to school if you don't think that people should respond differently to experts in the field than people that are not experts?
I don't. The argument is the same regardless of who it comes from. Now, I can show that I'm capable of certain techniques or methods for if someone wants to hire me.
Why do you go to college to learn about biology and not the Quran?
So that I can understand biology.
Why would you take those as authorities or those as a valid way to knowing rather than the Quran?
Because I don't take it on faith. We go into a lab and actually do it.
Okay, what reason do you have to believe that experiments in the lab give you reliable conclusions?
Because you can repeat them.
How do you know that you've repeated them?
Because I've repeated them, and other students have repeated the same thing.
If experiments were not a reliable way of deriving truth, then you wouldn't have a way of repeatedly doing something to derive that you had repeatedly done something. Because no matter how many experiments that you got, you wouldn't be able to reason from that.
Are you arguing that experiments are not reliable?
I'm arguing that you don't have a foundation.
So what is a foundation?
What
would make an experiment make sense? Because God said so?
One would be the assumption of reasonability. So that would be that you can think and understand and reason about things. Another one would be the consistency of nature. So when you bang two objects against each other and you see one moves further, you infer from that there is some nature of reality that you can predict in the future will behave that way, and you try to understand that with different hypotheses. Okay, but if you didn't begin with the position that the world is reasonable, if you didn't begin with the position that you can learn things through experimentation or that there's even causality, then no matter how many things that you tried to attempt, you would never get any closer to that. This is similar to Hume's induction argument, isn't it? I don't like that guy, but converse, Hume's induction argument. What is that one again?
His induction argument that nature is uniformed because it works, but that it's not necessarily that nature won't necessarily hold. Is that what you're talking about?
I don't even know. I don't read Hume, so I it's been years since I've heard the argument about induction, but I thought there was some argument about induction not being reliable. Oh well, maybe I shouldn't even brought it up. But
yeah. So he does say that that the uniformity of nature, the induction is like a tenable or a tentative thing, I guess. That tomorrow, that I guess gravity could not work. But just that you have to, the thing is that you have to assume that it will work. Like that's the whole argument with Hume, is that, well, you can say uniformity of nature, like nature's uniform, but you just have to assume that based off of an inference from the past, that the future will be like the past. And so that's the argument against Hume, is that it's an assumption or a presupposition in that sense.
Yeah, and perhaps there could be a way of grounding that. But my point is that Taylor has a lot of unexamined philosophical assumptions that he goes into the lab with. And I'm not saying they're wrong, but I'm saying the grounding is an issue.
I don't think they're unexamined. I think you're assuming that. And I still don't see any logical grounding from your perspective. If I can't have any reasonable conclusion just by running the experiment over and over, if I can't use observation, then how are you able to determine God?
Well, it's not my position that it's not my position that sorry, I got distracted by a comment. Well, I apologize. What did you just say?
I got a little distracted
too. If you didn't believe that you could learn things through observation, how would you know about God? That's, again, an epistemological question. And I don't take the position that we can't learn things from observation, but I think that I have a grounding for that belief. And to the extent that I don't, it's based on like a method of that I am, like what I do. I think the way we think is according to logic, and we try to learn things. We believe in causation naturally. I think you have to be really high in academia before you start being stupid enough to deny causality.
Yeah, I mean, I've examined the assumptions. I doubt reasonability and reliability and consistency, but
okay, so you doubt reasonability, and how do you get out of that?
Because there are results.
How do you know there's results? If the reasonability were not true, you wouldn't be able to examine results.
Except I get the results that I want.
How would you know?
Well, memory. If memory is false, then... Sorry?
If reasonability is not true, you can't think about the past.
And yet here I am thinking about the past.
You assert.
I think I'm thinking about the past,
Mm-hmm.
but there's absolutely no other way to operate. So,
well, I agree.
But how does that entail God?
It doesn't. This is talking about the way that we all proceed from a certain starting point, and so you are starting from all of these assumptions and intuitions, and then when anybody suggests something that goes against those, you just say, "Oh, that's illogical," and you provide no argument.
It's not a starting point or assumption I hold. It's just a method that I use. Did we lose him?
Hang on. I think what happened is his mic came undone or something. There he is.
I made a mistake. Yeah, sorry about that.
Yeah.
Okay. So it's not a starting point or assumption that I actually hold to be true. So that's how I get around it. That's how I've answered the question to myself. How do I trust this? Sorry. Sorry. I can't quote unquote trust it, but it's a method that I can use, and it seems to be working as far as I can tell, and there's nothing else I can do about it.
Okay, because if it weren't true, you wouldn't be able to evaluate this. So all of these claims are based on the presumption that it is true. You may get that from somewhere,
well,
but
no, it's not a presumption that it's true at all. It's actually just it's just the method of using it.
So Tony makes a good point. He's like, the scientific method is the closest thing science has to a foundation. So like, you could say that science is grounded in the scientific method, for example. What do you say about that?
I don't really agree with that. I would say that logic and observation are more foundational to the scientific method. Not quite sure where he's going with that, though. But my point is not that I necessarily believe it or assume that it's true, but it's that I can use this information that I think I have to do something, and I think it does something. So even if this is all a delusion, even if it's not, even if it doesn't rise to the level of a hallucination or delusion, it's just complete nonsense. Well, that's all I've got to work with. Makes sense to me.
Yeah, so
within the reality that it is.
So we've been going for about 2.5 hours, and while I'm enjoying the conversation, and I think that a lot of other people are as well, I think that what we should do maybe here is take some questions. Like if people have questions in the audience, just go ahead and post them. But we're going to wrap up within maybe the next 10 minutes. And but I guess I'll just exercise more moderator privilege as I've been doing, and just ask another question.
Just so you know, I really love the idea of answering questions. I think that because we're approaching this conversation from such different positions, there wasn't really a lot of room for any fruit there. But
Yeah.
I think that a lot of people that are listening are engaging the Euthyphro dilemma a little more seriously, and
Sure.
I'd be happy to address that.
Yeah, and I'm seeing some like stuff in the side chat that's like answering some of the questions, well, yeah, but at some point you've got to ask, like, well, how do we know what God's nature is, or and then somebody else will say, well, that's an interesting question as well, but it's just not this question. Like, first we talk about the dilemma, then we move, and then so I think the side chat has been kind of getting to some things as well, but so that's interesting. But yeah, any questions that come in, let me know. I think that Nick is probably right about that. That it helps to take the opponents out of the picture. So I just I'm kind of stuck on whenever I hear moral claim, I like to always resort back to moral progress because, and we kind of went over it a little bit, but like I just I always want to ask, like, well, is moral progress like if somebody says, well, this is what's moral, I just ask, like, well, is that so? You're saying that's moral progress, like it's an improvement rather than a difference, right? And then I want to go from there and say, well, if we're improving towards something, there has to be some standard in which we're improving toward that. When we get to there one day, we'll be there, right? Rather, because if there's not the standard and you just have this moral claim and this moral claim, then they're different. And so I guess that's still what I'm trying to understand from Taylor's position. Now, I don't know if he has come up with a way to formulate that to answer the question or not. So maybe that could be the case too. Taylor, did you want to try and take another swing at that, or do you want to just come back whenever? Like, let me know when you got more of a formulation for it.
At trying to ground it.
No, I was just saying, like, again, with the moral progress, like if we're going to say this claim is an improvement over this claim, then you're saying that it's improving towards some standard, right? Some ultimate standard. And that one day when we progress high enough, we'll get to that standard. It differentiates that from this moral claim and this opposite moral claim. They're different claims. Rather, is saying that no, this one's a moral improvement over this one. This one is higher up toward the standard. And I'm saying, like, do you want to try and like help me understand one more time before we get these other questions? Like, how is your, like, do you have that a standard? And if you do have a standard, for example, we would say God's nature or something like that, then would you say like moral claim, for example, like if you something's more these, let's say something is moral, you say it's an improvement toward a standard.
As in, like, what would the ideal world look like?
No, I just mean like a moral standard, just something of morality, like what, like for example, with a if I'm going to measure something, I have to know what a foot is before I can say that something is 3 foot, right? So if I say I need a board that's a foot long, and a board's 8 inches long, and a board's 11 inches long, the 11 inches is is better. It's an improvement, or it's better than the 8-inch board because I need 12 inches, right? But it's only better in the sense that it's closer to the standard, right? It's closer to what I need. So that's what I'm asking is, do you have like, do you have a standard like that we're trying to get toward, or is it not? Is that just the wrong way of looking at it? And like, there's not a standard. It's just more like a claim that you're making just based off of some logical analysis, but it's not necessarily standard.
Well, it seems like we probably are using the word standard differently. You can have any standard you want. It just depends on whether that's internally consistent or externally consistent. You could have a standard of, I get to kill people. Well, is that an objectively true standard, or is that a universally applicable standard? that would be the question morality seeks to answer. And so if I could sum it up in a word, it would be freedom. Does that answer it all?
You're saying if you could sum it up, that freedom is the standard?
It's the simplest way to sum it up, I suppose, in a word.
Okay. And I would just say like Tom Jump says something like that. His morality claim, he says that morality means something like not imposing on somebody's will. But it's like, so if your child's going to touch a hot stove and you stop them, you're imposing their will. So you're being immoral when you stop them from doing that, because you're imposing on their freedom, because it's defined in such a way. So, and then he says, well, yeah, you technically are being immoral to stop them from doing that, but he'll like make some type of qualification, like, but it's, it's another greater, like it's another good to stop them from doing that. But this, or he'll say something like, it's practical because we don't live in the best of all possible worlds, or something like that. So that's what I was wondering, is if if it's freedom is the standard, then there are all kind of things that seem like they would be moral, like stopping your child from touching a stove. But if you stop them, you're like taking away their autonomy, or like you're imposing their will or whatever. So, but maybe that's not your view.
Kind of. So the best of all possible worlds would be the freedom of that child to touch the hot pan and not get burned by it, so that I don't have to impose on its will. And then
that'd be a different situation.
What's that?
It seems like that would be a totally different situation, though.
Like, yeah, that would be the ideal world.
It would take the morality aspect out of it, right? Because the whole thing with morality is that it is hot, and it's like, would it be ethical to impose on the will to stop them from doing something? You know what I'm saying? Like, if you took the pain and the bad part out of it, it seems like it takes the moral dimension out of it as well.
Well, it takes the dilemma out of it. It takes, it's not, you don't have to impose on the will anymore. So it is an evil to impose on their will, but it's a greater evil to let them get their hand burned.
Okay.
So you have to you can decide between those two states of existence. You don't have the ideal option. You only have these two bad options, one of which is significantly worse. It's the lesser of two evils, essentially.
Okay. Well, that's enough for my questions. Nicholas, Andrew T says, so God, I think he means like big G God, can't be illogical.
I don't think anything that exists could be illogical in terms of a logical contradiction. I don't think that things that are logical contradictions are actually things. I think it makes it, we have an intuition that if we have a word that makes sense and another word that makes sense, we can put those words together and it will always make sense. But we can put words together in a way that they do not actually express ideas. Like, for instance, a square circle is not an idea. It's not actually a thing. Because the understanding of what a square is and the understanding of what a circle is, if they're being taken in the same respect, are contradictory. And so you cannot add the features of one to the other unless you're changing what you're talking about. And so, yeah, I don't think anything can be illogical in terms of a logical contradiction.
Oh, okay. I see where you're coming from. Go ahead.
And I think you can put together behavioral standards in ways that contradict each other and ways that don't.
Well, I mean self-contradictory when I'm talking about logical contradiction.
Yeah, me too.
Okay, well then any moral action that has a self-contradiction in it, like I ought to make pancakes in a manner in which I do not make pancakes, that is not an action. It may sound like it's an action, but it's not an action. It's self-contradictory.
Well, you can't do it, so it's not really a problem, is it?
Well, it's not that's not the issue that we're addressing here. We're talking about whether or not these things are things, not whether or not I can do them. I can't fly. That doesn't mean it's a logical contradiction for a human being to fly.
Okay. I was just addressing the way that you were talking about how the logical contradictions emerge from the way we construct the ideas or the language. and you can do that with behavioral standards.
You could try to force any logical contradiction into a sentence, yeah, and it would follow the same rules, and that you would not be expressing a thing or an action or whatever else.
Yeah, so you can't say don't murder, but also you can murder.
Yeah, if you mean in the same way, in the same sense, if you're not adding conditionals. Murder might be a bad example because it's got entailed in it that morality or the legality aspect to it. Yeah. But I think that it is not a contradiction to say you should kill someone that is about to murder you, but you should not kill someone because you don't want to carry them to term. I don't think that's a contradiction, because I think those are different conditions. And so the proposition if then is a different if in those situations. And so I felt like your language about universal applicability was a little bit confusing, because the conditional statements, I guess, would be universally applicable to specific situations.
Well, maybe it is, but that's why I was trying to stipulate, like, I'm not saying that that lying is absolutely always wrong, or that killing is always absolutely wrong. It does depend on the conditions.
Right, but there could be situations where it's objectively wrong to lie, and those would probably fill certain conditions, right? Like, yeah. And so I'm just pointing out that it could be that if you are a king is one of the conditions, that it's not a contradiction to say if you are a king, you should not be killed, but if you are a peasant, you should be killed. I don't consider that a contradiction. It may go against our moral intuitions, but that's a different matter.
Sure. Well, all right. So we got another question here. Let's see. Look like one way. Look like we got about the same dog, but mine's brindle. It's a little bit different color. Andrew T again. No, that's for Daniel. I'm sorry. He's asking, but you can answer if you want. Can God exist in paradoxes?
Did you want to answer that?
Well, he was asking that to somebody else actually, but he did have one.
I'd like to address it. I'd like to address those. Taylor, did you want to address them? Do you want to address them first or second, or do you not care?
Address these questions. Andrew's T's comments.
Yeah.
What was his first one?
It was can God exist in paradoxes?
I would say that no, that would not make any sense. Kind of by definition.
I would want to know what he means by a paradox, because a paradox is often something that seems logically contradictory but isn't. If he means it's actually logically contradictory, then I would agree with Taylor there.
Yeah, because what he means.
Well, the refutation that works the best is to go ahead and admit the opposite. So, like, you can say, like, well, no, because it's a logical contradiction, but then go ahead and admit the opposite. Like the example that I like to use is like the old, can God make a rock so big that he can't lift it? Oh, no, because it's logical impossibility. Oh, really? Well, so he's not all powerful. Okay, well, then he is all powerful and he can lift a rock that's too big for him to lift. And then they'll go, well, hold on, that's illogical. And you go, well, if he's already doing illogical things, he can just do that as well. So, like, it just shows you that it just isn't a question that's worth asking, like impossibilities.
I would take the position that those aren't expressing actions. So a god, like a rock that's so heavy that an omnipotent being cannot lift it, that seems like a logical contradiction in the same way that it is a square that is a circle in the same sense. And so I could see, like, if I wanted that avenue, I could go converse this way, but I don't even think it expresses something with semantic content. So I wouldn't be able to accept that God could do it and then God could do this other contradictory thing, because I don't think you're expressing ideas.
All right. Well, it doesn't look like we have any more questions. Nobody has any more questions for Snake or Taylor. Let's see.
Try to stump me.
Yeah. I mean, I'm the one that had all the questions for Taylor tonight. I like. No,
and I actually like that style of moderation where you try and keep it focused.
Yeah, because I mean, I don't want to, like, I don't know. The only thing that I didn't want to do is to seem like I was trying to, like, pile on, and like ask you questions and he asks you questions, but I just felt like the questions I was asking were for clarification more than like so I can understand where you're coming from.
Yeah.
I thought it was good. Usually I wouldn't want a moderator to be involved so much, but I felt like there was so little fertile ground in this discussion that it was really helpful.
Sure. And sometimes, it's that both people in the discussion have they both have been reading the same literature. So it's like, well, hang on. When you're looking at S5 logic, do you think blah blah blah? And then the other goes, well, yeah, in S5 I would say that, but like they're so on the same page that they don't need a moderator. Just sit back and let them talk. But I think that yeah, because you guys are coming from a little bit different backgrounds. So one way I ask Nicholas, what's your favorite sword?
I'm gonna have to say katana. I don't know if objectively that's the best sword for warfare, but I sure do like the look of it.
So this might be somewhere where you and Taylor can have a common ground, because Taylor, if I'm remembering correctly, your YouTube channel you started based off of debunking like claims like did warriors carry swords on their back or something like that?
What was the position you took on that, by the way, Taylor?
Well, I actually kind of debunked the debunkers. I wasn't saying that it was historically used, but I was able to functionally draw katanas, bastard sword, and a claymore from my back, and it works. And there's a couple different techniques you can use.
And I guess that would depend on like your size as well, because I was thinking about like, the term being in shape, right? And I thought about it like somebody who's like super big and like muscular, right? It's like they can't even scratch an itch on their back because their arms are just so swollen that they have limited range, limited motion, right? And so I thought, like, I was thinking about the question, like, are you in shape when you're you're not even flexible, and like I was thinking, but I guess that would be something with like the sword. Like, for example, I could reach like halfway down my back, like I could draw a sword, right? But somebody who's like a big warrior, who's like super massive, who has limited range, they probably couldn't necessarily do it. But I think like a guy like one of us would be able to do it.
Yeah, Taylor, when you were doing your experiment, did you have shoulder armor on?
I did for part of it, I think. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
I did test it with armor.
Yeah, because I really think that would be a big influencer there. Yeah.
Yeah, it wasn't too encumbering though, but I'm sure at some point it might get enough. It might limit your motion, because I don't know if. Yeah, I don't know. Plate armor actually isn't as limiting as a lot of people think it is. But
good question. One way. So Nicholas, it looks like Brenda seemed to think that you were using a lot ad homs, is what Brenda keeps bringing that up.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So
address that, like
I would like to address that. Yeah. So if at any point my argument was that my opponent's arguments are wrong because of who he is, or the arguments that he is making are inconsistent with the person that he claims to be, those would be ad hominem attacks. However, I gave reasons for why I thought that his arguments did not stand up, and why I didn't think he was properly addressing my arguments. And the comments about his personal nature should not be taken as strength or validity in terms of his arguments. And that's why I said, let's put it on the table. If this is an epistemological dilemma, you shouldn't be listening to me. And so did I make personal attacks during this discussion? I think I did, and I think sometimes that's warranted. Like, I think it's really important to point out when someone's not on an equal playing field with you and they're not addressing the ideas. And that's aside from me making the argument that they're not addressing the ideas.
Sure.
But in this case, it's just semantic, since I'm not using the labels you want. But in the majority of the time, I actually did agree with your definitions. So it strikes me as poisoning the well, since you're literally saying that you trust me or my arguments because I'm not using the word that you want me to.
Well, I was pointing out that you're using stipulative definitions and not the proper definitions. Yeah.
But it doesn't matter if we're understanding the concepts.
It really does matter when I'm trying to talk about something, or you think that you've addressed the Euthyphro, and yet when you try to restate the Euthyphro, you change what it says.
I went and used yours because
you repeatedly inflated the statement. Is it holy because the gods love it? With is it holy because it's rooted in God's nature? You repeatedly did that.
Well, yeah, I am conflating the third option with one of the options. Yes. Because
so
that approval or love, that is based entirely in its nature, and you don't seem to want to explore that.
Yeah, so maybe I can add one thing to this. So I remember one time somebody asked William Lane Craig on the ad hominem thing. They asked like, and again, I think that you kind of hand-wavingly dismissed William Lane Craig here as well. But he does have 2 PhDs in this field. So like, even though we might, disagree like with somebody's conclusions, it's like I often hear atheists say William Lane Craig's an idiot and John Lennox, they're both just ridiculous. But it's like one has 2 PhDs in the field and one has 3 PhDs in related fields. So like it's like we gotta, handle that. But one time William Lane Craig was asked, like they said, well, you kind of were making an ad hominem against this professor because you're saying he wasn't educated on the topic and that he had not, this wasn't his field of study or whatever. And he goes like, well, it's not an ad hominem because I didn't attack his character and say therefore he's wrong. Rather, you could just say that I was being impolite. And so like I think that's something too as well. Like, maybe there's times when people are impolite, right? But they're not necessarily saying like you're wrong because of your character. Now, whether Nicholas did that or not, like that's not. I was just pointing that out. Like, an ad hominem just has to do with you saying.
Yeah, exactly. And the question of whether or not I was polite tonight, I think, is an open question.
Sure. Let's see. Where's the question I missed, Tony? How? Oh, there you go. All right, so it looks like I think that might be it. Yeah. Okay, so Tony says, and I don't disagree with Snake on that, but he didn't show why.
Why what?
Tony, could you clarify what he didn't show? Like what you agreed with him on, but that he didn't show? That way he can fully answer that question. Let's see. It's true. Yeah, no, again, and one thing is everybody who's in here, if you haven't hit the like button, hit it. If you've been thinking about subscribing, but you're like, you know what, I don't know if I want to subscribe yet, right? Just go ahead and do it. You know there's going to be some cool conversation in here. So, all right, Tony says, why the third is the same as the first?
Yeah. So why is the statement it is holy because it is consistent with God's nature the same as it is holy because God loves it? Why is that the same? Is what I think Tony Design is asking.
Yeah, because if you're saying it's good because God loves it, well, that love is rooted in its nature. So the nature is rooted in that answer anyway.
So,
it's,
but
if you ask, so why is their love causal to this goodness? Well, because of their nature. The nature of that love stems from the nature of the God.
But say that, like, for example, here's an example of nature. Like, say it's in my nature to be faithful to one woman, right? But I may desire more than one woman, right? But like, it's not something that I would do because it's not in my nature. Now, that's just a human example. Like with God, we would use, that wouldn't necessarily apply because we would say, that he wouldn't desire anything because he created all things, right? So he's not in that position. But I'm just using an example that we can understand. Like there is times when something's not in your nature, but it's not necessarily something that you can't want something outside of your nature. Do you get where I'm coming from with that? Because it seemed like that was your argument, is that God's wants something because it's part of his nature.
But if you're assuming an infallible God, like you guys are, I think, or a God whose standard is reality, then its love is going to be directly stemming and rooted in its nature. It's not going to have any discord between its nature and its love and its desires. But I don't actually care how many options there are. I just want to understand what you mean by it's rooted in God's nature, and like, why is his nature the way it is?
Well, I'm sorry. Can you repeat that again? I was laughing at a comment that just came in.
I don't actually care how many options there are, like if it's a dilemma or a trilemma or what have you. I think that the fundamental basis of the question or the dilemma is what the nature of goodness. So I just want to understand, if there is this third option, I want to understand how it's different from the love. And so we have to explore what the nature is that we're talking about.
Right. Well, you know, my argument is different from Nick's argument. Like, my arguments would be something more like, does God command something because it's good, or is it good because God commands it? And I just say that, like, well, no, God is the good. Like, it's like saying, does God command something because it's God? You know, like, what we mean by good is God because God is the standard, because God created all things, and thus everything is a byproduct of God, and thus they all owe their existence and look toward the absolute standard that created them. Now, if this had been a universe, that wouldn't apply.
But how do we separate that from the idea that God's love is good?
What do you mean by that? Because it's kind of a vague question. Like, how do we separate that from the idea that God's love is good?
So assuming a God with a perfect moral standard, how do we separate that God's love from that God's nature?
I'm still failing to understand exactly what you mean by that.
It seems like his love would be an interaction with something external to himself, right? Unless it's some sort of self-referential love.
But what is making that love good is the thing. Is there something else behind that love?
So again, like, when you ask, like, what is making that love good, it's like asking, like, what makes God's love God? You know, like, I'm saying that God is the good. Like, it is what we appeal to as the good because it is the standard. Like, when we appeal to the standard goodness, we're appealing to God's nature. So, like, that's what I'm saying, is that it is the standard by which everything else is judged, because it is the creator of all things. Like, if God didn't create all things and it was a God that wasn't necessary and, like, created everything, and that everything was a byproduct or contingent upon God, then that wouldn't apply. But if God created everything that's in existence, then everything in existence looks toward the thing that created everything else as the standard. Like, it seems to me that it only could follow that way. But I know that we don't necessarily, like, we've been going 3 hours. Like, I don't know if we want to go way down that road or not, because we got a really strong philosophical question here as well in the chat.
All right. Well, so what if I just said, like, what if I have my own dilemma? Does God command it because of his nature, or is God's nature good because it's good, or is God's nature good because it's God's nature? Would that be a valid dilemma?
No, because again, I think you're using the term good, which basically means what God chose. Like, it basically just means, like, God himself. Like I'm saying, God, and William Lane Craig and other, like, divine command theorists have pointed this out way before me. Like, that God is the good in that statement. Like, is God good, or because does God command something because it's good, or is it good because God commands it? It's just saying like, does God command something that is his nature because it's like it's just it doesn't make sense when you
I just want to clarify that divine command theory would be it's good because God commands it, but non-voluntaristic divine command theory would be it's not because God commands it that it's good, but it's because of God's nature, which is the third horn here.
Well, if God is the good, then things are good because he commands them.
No, because he didn't command himself, right?
Well, if it's his nature and he makes his own nature, then he did.
He doesn't make his own nature. That's a contradiction.
Ah, well, then I can agree with you there.
It's like a necessary, it's like a necessary being's nature. It's like, well, God chooses nature, but it's just like it's a necessary being. Like it's like 1 + 1 = 2 necessarily, right? Like it's not like one can choose to have a different nature than one. It just is 1 + 1 = 2. Like that's the nature of the fact. So, but again,
yeah, I totally agree.
Okay, so
I think this was the heart of what I was trying to get to, because I would say a good God's nature is necessarily good, but it's necessarily a certain way too, just like 2 + 2 is necessarily 4.
But well, we would agree about that.
Cool. Yeah, great. A point of agreement. So we got a really serious question now.
It only took 3 hours.
Right. We got a serious question. Andrew asked, would Lightning McQueen buy car insurance or life insurance?
That's a false dichotomy. Neither. He'd live on the edge.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. It's funny because I heard somebody say something like that. It was more of a rude, derogatory thing, but they were like, if somebody raped a prostitute, is it stealing or is it rape? And I was like, dude, don't do that to me. You're gonna make me laugh about that? That's wrong, bro.
Well, the answer is just yes.
You're gonna be in trouble. All right. So, yep. I think we're all good now. Can atheists get coverage for acts of God? Yes, you can. All you got to do is turn from your ways and acknowledge him. Acknowledge that he is who he is.
But basically, make sure you read the fine print, because depending on the contract, certain acts of ruach, or whatever that word is. What's that word for woe?
What'd you say? Did you say ruach? Ruach?
Yeah, is it ruach? Is that the word?
That just means spirit in the Hebrew.
Oh, okay. I'm using the wrong word then. There's a word that's translated as woe, and but things like earthquakes in certain contracts will not be considered an act of God. So read your fine print.
Yeah, like I need to be considering woe more, because it says woe to you if the world likes you, and it seems that the world of YouTube has been liking my videos quite a lot. So I need to reconsider my position. I'm just kidding. But anyway, I appreciate everybody being here. It's been 3 hours and 15 minutes, and if you're watching live, thanks so much for being here. If you're watching after the fact, you're a trooper for making it through this, and I hope you learned something from it. I've got the discussion coming up tomorrow night with Ask Yourself. I'd love for everybody to be there in the comments so that you can ask a bunch of questions and help me through, because he is he's pretty high up in the his ethical knowledge. So a lot of these questions that we're asking right now and we're struggling through, sometimes it seems like he has thought about these things a lot. So I think that it'll be a really cool conversation. And then also, like I said, I've got more conversations coming up that'll be really cool. So yeah, appreciate Taylor coming on, and thanks to Nicholas as well for coming on and having this discussion. Is there anything else you guys want to add before we take off?
Thanks for having us. And even though I did make some personal attacks against Taylor, I thank you for continuing on with this conversation in a cordial way.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, shit happens. Oh, sorry. I don't mean to curse. If
It's all
that's
right.
stuff
It's
happens.
quite all right.
These things happen. And thanks for having the conversation with me, and thanks for having me on. And hopefully, maybe we can expound upon the ideas, especially since we got to that point of agreement at the end there.
Sure. All right. Well, we'll consider this, and I may rewatch it and see like where we can improve. And yep. All right. Appreciate everybody being here, and you guys have a great week. If I don't see you tomorrow night.
Thanks, guys.